Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to go through the planetary transits or Gochara for August 2023, and this is all a talk or perspective from Vedic Astrology or Jyotish. I believe what I was seeing is that the main theme for the month is rethinking your life mission. So we'll get into all of that. Note first, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate profession for support. And then you might take a minute to read the rest of this disclaimer. All right, so transit dates for August. So August 1st, full moon in Capricorn or Makara. Um, that's Capricorn in Sanskrit. And this is going to be happening in Shravana Nakshatra or a lunar mansion in Shravana. There are a couple other things happening that day. Jupiter will be forming an exact aspect to Mars, and Saturn will be forming an exact aspect on Mercury. So actually, August 1st, there's going to be some moving and shaking. August 3rd, Sun enters Aslesha Nakshatra or lunar mansion. And by the way, whenever you see a double asterisk in any of my talks, that means that there's a teaching video on this topic, and all my teaching videos are in the concepts playlist. So, like the sun here has a double asterisk. So, if you want to learn more about symbolism of the sun, I have a video on that, so you can check that out. But moving right along, so that same day, August 3rd, Mercury enters Purva Phalguni Nakshatra. On August 6th, Venus goes combust or asta. August 7th, Venus re-enters Cancer or Aslesha. August 9th, Jupiter forms an exact aspect on Mercury. August 12th, Mars enters Uttara Phalguni Nakshatra. August 16th, there's a new moon in Cancer or Karaka, and that's going to be in Aslesha Nakshatra. On August 17th, Sun enters Leo or Simha. That's going to be also in it's also going to be entering Magha Nakshatra simultaneously. 18th of August, Mars enters Virgo or Kanya. Mercury enters Uttara Phalguni Nakshatra. August 19th, Venus ends combustion. August 23, Mercury goes retrograde. August 27th, Saturn forms an exact aspect on the Sun. So we have a lot of these exact aspects going on this month. What is that, 4 already? 4, yeah, so that's quite a few. Because there's this kind of parade moving through Leo. So Leo is going to be essential. So again, if you know your birth chart, or you can get a free copy of your Vedic birth chart online, there are plenty of places to get a free copy. It's good to have a copy. So like, again, I don't think it's really possible to, as with so many people watching and all different birth charts and all that kind of stuff. I don't think you can really give detailed information for people that's so useful. Um, but if I talk about the cycles in general, and in your chart which house relates to Leo, then you'll have some idea, not a full pictured idea, but some idea of where these energies are playing out in your life. So, in any case, so where did I end that? So Venus ends combustion on the 19th. Mercury goes retrograde on the 23rd. Saturn exact aspect on the Sun on the 27th. August 28th, Mercury re-enters Purva Phalguni Nakshatra. On the 31st of August, Mercury goes combust. And on that last day, Sun enters Purva Phalguni Nakshatra also. All right, so those are the dates. Let's talk about this now. So let's talk about the moon first, or Chandra, transits for August 2023. August 1st, there's a full moon in Capricorn or Makara in Shravana Nakshatra. So Capricorn's is neutral for the moon. It doesn't give it strength or give it weakness. It's pretty neutral. So, but Capricorn is a movable, so it's an active sign. It's also an earth sign. So it's a very active, practical type of placement or constellation, Rashi, they would say in Sanskrit. The symbol here is of this nakshatra Shravana, and again, a nakshatra is a lunar mansion. So the sky, 360 degrees, is divided into 27 parts, and each of those parts is considered a house, a lunar house, because each day the moon will move through those different houses. And it takes about 27 and a half days for the moon to go through the 360 degrees of the sky and also the 27 lunar mansions. So, yep. Clearly, I need to make videos on that. They will be coming in due time. So, but getting back to Shravana, so the symbol here is 3 footprints, and the deity is Vishnu or the preserver. So, this nakshatra has the energy of like even Shravana, that word is related to the word to hear in Sanskrit. And the energy of this nakshatra is like learned wisdom, like even the goddess Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, is related to this nakshatra. Sacred oral traditions, teaching, learning, hearing, language, also gossip. If there's some negative energy here, some level planets. Um, but also prosperity, fame, kindness, generosity, charitableness. So it's mostly a high-minded, nakshatra, of like tradition and teaching and that sort of thing, erudition, travel, religion, universities, classical studies, recording, and storytelling. So, um, that those energies will probably be playing out, especially because there's a full moon. Full moons generally have the energy of like a culmination point. And so with either the full moon or the new moon, typically, because the moon represents the intuitive mind and the emotional body, that there's usually epiphanies that can come along at those times of the cycle, lunar cycle. Um, and, there can also be like emotional releases, so that can happen. But again, it's full moons tend to, because it's a full moon is bright, it's full, it's luminous. That's strength for the moon. And so there's usually this sort of like shining, luminous quality to full moons, and especially in this kind of nakshatra. Most likely things will go well unless there's some pretty strong negative, you know, placements there. On August 16th, we have a new moon in Cancer, Karka, and that's going to be Aslesha nakshatra. New moon, on the other hand, the moon is dark because it's essentially eclipsed by the sun and it's not reflecting the light of the sun anymore. Um, but it's going to be in its own sign because Cancer is ruled by moon. So there's going to be it's kind of a mix here of there's some strength to the moon, but also the moon is just releasing its last cycle, starting its new one. And I believe I have these charts and I'm going to go through them, but I believe in this, the new moon cycle in August. The moon and the sun are in the last degree of the constellation of Cancer. So whenever planet is in the first or last degree, it's a bit unstable because it's shifting energies. So there's some strength, but there's also some weakness. So it's a mixed bag, but and basically this mixed bag, we would say is basically the moon is going to be an exaggerated condition. The other thing is that this is going to be happening in Aslesha. And I'll talk about that. Um, Let me just cover the moon first. We'll get into Aslesha. So the moon is going to be in its own sign that we call that Swa. It's Sandhi, so it's in the last degree of the sign. So again, some strength, weakness. It's also movable or active, so there's more movement, and it's a water sign. So rather than being an earth sign like Capricorn being practical, water signs tend to be more emotional in nature. The other thing is that with the moon in its own sign, Sun is there and Venus is also there. And this is also at the exact time of the new moon. This is all going to be happening in the Lagna or the first house, ascendant, rising sign. These are all different names for the same thing. So basically, it's going to be a moon dominated moment in time. And the moon is going to dominate Sun and Venus. So there's going to be a lot of emotional energy coming through. And this is all happening in Aslesha. So let's talk about that. So Aslesha nakshatra, the symbol of that is a snake. The deity of this is Sarpas, which is a divinized serpent. So there's a lot of snake-like energy here. So snakes, depending on your perspective, can be negative, can be positive. So generally with this nakshatra, there's the, kind of qualities of being ungrateful, deceptive, cunning. So again, these are the more negative aspects of a snake. secretive, being misunderstood, contentious, controversial, hypnotizing. Um, some people love snakes, some people are afraid of them. But snakes are, they kind of do their own thing. They slither around, and if they get upset, like they'll stand up and attack or bite you or at least hiss or something, and then they'll eventually like slither away and hide under a rock or something. Um, so all those aspects, some again, if you have negative planets here, more of that energy can come out. But again, we have a full moon with Venus and the sun. So the sun is a sattvic planet, so it's a spiritual planet. Venus um, is a symbol, is a planet that symbolizes like basically bringing the dead back to life. So even though there might be a little rock and roll at this moment, um, it might be a little bit jarring. It still seems like the overall energy of this moment is one of healing and moving forward. Let me continue with Aslesha here. So painful bites, like sudden, like unexpected things, but also wisdom. So this is more the, and again, because wisdom and insight, concentration. So especially because this is all going to be moon dominated here, you could see a lot of more the wisdom, insight, concentration aspects of this moment. Also power, sexuality, and then intertwining disruptions, poison, medicine, and drugs can also be associated with Aslesha. Especially like in medicine, right? There's I forget. I want to say the caduceus with the two snakes winding around the staff, but I'm not sure that's correct. I think it's actually the staff of Mercury. That's the real medical symbol. So anyway, I looked it up once and I was surprised, and so it looks like I'm still a little bit confused about that. But anyway, check that out. But there is this symbol of like two snakes wound around a staff that symbolizes medicine. So two snakes, right? Transformation, the shedding of skin. So and the shedding of skin, whether it's physical or emotional. There's a fragility there. And it's uncomfortable. Um, but you get this newness, right? This new skin. So that's kind of the energy here. But let's look at this quickly. So this is the full moon on the first. This is a chart for that. Again, this is the North Indian style chart. Top diamond here in the middle. That's the lugna, or we call that the first house, rising sign, ascendant. We're all different names for the same thing. So here, with a full moon at the beginning of the month, this moment in time, let's see, it's a Libra or Tula Lugna, and what's in this house, well, we have K2 and Chitra. K2 is the south node of the moon, symbolizing things that are hidden, unexpected, unusual, in Chitra, so a structure. So there's an unusual structure here. It's aspected by Jupiter and Bharani. Jupiter is a planet of expansion, growth, benevolence in Bharani, which is symbolized by the womb. So we're talking life and death, and because Jupiter's here, we're talking probably more life. Um, we also have Rahu aspecting here. So Rahu's on Ashwini. Rahu is the north node of the moon. It's also things like hidden, unexpected, unusual, but also ambition. In Ashwini, Ashwini is symbolized by the Kumara twins, who are the celestial physicians or healers. So it looks like there's a lot of healing energy for some sort of structure. You can get that already. And then we have aspecting Jupiter and Rahu. We had the Saturn retrograde in its own sign in Aquarius. So we have this massively strong Saturn in the fifth house, aspecting Jupiter and Rahu in the seventh house. The fifth house has to do with counseling, creativity, intellect, counseling. So it looks like, and especially with Saturn in its own sign of Aquarius, this is almost like a engineering type energy. And this is aspecting the Jupiter Rahu in the seventh house of relationships and also independent business. So there's kind of re engineering or engineering of new, unusual, pioneering type of enterprise. So that's what I have here, right? Yeah. So birth of a new business venture structure. And there's some spirituality here because Jupiter's here and Jupiter represents spirituality. It could be education as well. But again, this unusualness, it could even be something online or something technological, like because K2 and Rahu represent technology and also photography. So maybe something online. Um, yeah. Okay, so let's get back to Libra here, the ruling constellation. Libra is ruled by Venus, the planet that represents the arts and social connections and that sort of thing. So Venus has gone to the 11th house of clubs, income, group society. So it's a socializing house. It's also a house of income. And this is all in Leo. Leo represents, as a place, it represents like a stage and a high level stage. Um, Venus is also the eighth lord. The eighth house is related to esoterica and other people's money. It's also related to chronic illness and disease, that sort of thing. Venus is in Magha nakshatra. Magha is symbolized by a throne. And so we have this high level um, royal energy here. Mercury is the ninth lord. The ninth lord is authority, government, father. That's also Magha. So now Mercury represents the rational mind. So it's in that same nakshatra energy. Mars is ruler of the second house of income as well as the seventh house of independent business, and that's in Purva Phalguni. So Mars represents innovation, initiative, that sort of thing. The second house represents savings, um, communication. The seventh house again represents independent business and relationships. And Purva Phalguni is this very different energy from Magha. It's right after Magha. Purva Phalguni is about, it's like the symbol of that. Instead of the throne, you can think of like the royalty king or queen on their throne and like authority and structure and responsibility. Um, Purva Phalguni is like the opposite. It's like a hammock. That's the symbol there. And it's about rest, relaxation, enjoyment, the arts, conjugal bliss, that sort of thing. So it's like R&R versus like, being in charge of a land and village or, country or something like that. Um, so with Venus, the planet of socializing, going to the 11th house of groups, society, and stuff like that in Leo, so again, stage, what I'm seeing here is like organizing some sort of high level business networking event is what I'm seeing here. So starting, yeah, that. And then here we go. So again, on the first, we have two exact aspects of the four that are going on this one. So um, Saturn is going to be an exact aspect to Mercury. Saturn represents structure. Mercury represents business and communication. So there's some new structure being created here, engineering of that, because especially when you have Mars and Saturn aspecting each other, you get this energy of like workaholism, athleticism, engineering, that sort of thing, because Mars is initiative and Saturn is perseverance. And then you have Jupiter with a direct aspect to Mars. So Jupiter again, healing, high level events, that sort of thing, banks, and Mars, the initiative. So when you get these two together, there's usually a lot of enthusiasm because Mars is a fiery planet and Jupiter expands that. But it can also be spiritual in action, activity because of the Jupiter aspect, and Jupiter again represents spirituality. So this full moon, it's interesting. It's in Capricorn. I mentioned that. At this exact moment in time, 14:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the moon is in the fourth house. So the moon represents like the mother, And the fourth house also represents the mother. So when you have a planet that represents a living being, or is the Jiva Karaka, it's the living symbol, in a house that represents that same person, it's called karako bhavanasha. I have a whole video on this. And what that means is, even though it seems like, okay, mother, the moon is full, so it's bright, and, it has a lot of light and energy, that's good, but this Karka Bhavanasha is going to cause problems to the living being. So, the living being being the mother. And this may not be your actual biological mother. This could be some sort of maternal figure in your life. Um, and the fourth house also represents ancestors and lineage and spiritual traditions. Um, and the moon in this house is also has what we call digbal, directional strength. I have a video on that. So it looks like at this time there's going to be an emotional culmination point for some mother-like figure in life. The moon is in Shravana, so again, I mentioned that energy is about like education, oral traditions, and that sort of thing. It aspects the 10th house of career and Cancer, so that's going to be strong there. And that's with Sun, which is in Pushya. So the Sun is a planet that represents career, purpose, mission, and Pushya is a nakshatra that's very nurturing. The symbol of that is a cow's udder, so supporting other beings through nourishment, like giving milk, kind of energy. So what I see here is it's almost like this passing on the torch of an ancestral oral tradition, especially one that came down through like the female line. And it doesn't have to actually be a female body. I mean, there are plenty of men who have a very feminine, nurturing type quality. So, um, yeah, and then what else is here? So another indication that there might be trouble here with whichever person this moon represents, again, some sort of maternal like figure, in an established tradition that's like has again kind of teacher, supporting type role or energy. We have this hugely, again, we're getting back to this hugely strong Swa Saturn in its own sign, retrograde, which forms a Shasha Yoga, which is a Raj Yoga. It's a royalty combination of planets. It's in the fifth house. So, again, before I talked about it as this kind of like counseling or engineering piece. But if we were to rotate this chart to the fourth house, which is again where this moon is, um, Aquarius in this chart is fifth for this particular lugna, but it's actually the second house to the fourth house. The second house and seventh house for people, individuals, are called Marakastanas, which are literally translated as houses of death. And so when there are strong negative placements or transits going through there, that can indicate trouble. Um, and because Saturn represents a planet of death, then again, and at least obstacles, delays, that sort of thing, it doesn't actually have to be death. Um, a chronic illness, even. And the other thing is that Saturn right now is in the nakshatra Shatabisha. Shatabisha is translated as 100 healers. And so when there are negative planets, malevolent planets such as Saturn in nakshatras like this, then it can indicate chronic disease. So things that are difficult to heal. So even if there's not a passing on, there's probably still some difficulty here with health. It can also, Saturn in the second house to the fourth house, that can also indicate like foreign languages, also traditional family, especially like an Indian family. Because whenever there's a strong Saturn, especially when it's like Swa in its own, constellation of Capricorn or Aquarius, there can be indications that this person has connections with India. Um, So, and the other thing that's interesting about this chart is that Saturn, you can see all these blue arrows like coming out of this fifth house here. So Saturn is aspecting Jupiter and Rahu in the seventh house. It's aspecting Mars, Mercury, Venus in the 11th house. It's aspecting the second house. Um, that's a lot of Saturnian energy. And so we would call this a Saturn dominated chart. So, without really looking at that and seeing that, you might not realize that Saturn has a lot more influence over this moment. Um, Otherwise, so all planets except for K2 and Sun are aspected by Saturn. And actually, what came to mind for myself, I just found out a few days ago, about a week ago, that one of my longtime meditation teachers had passed away in July. And it was so odd because, well, not odd. I mean, our spirits are always communicating with each other, but I've been doing her meditations for years. I mean, I've probably done her meditations more than anybody else that I've studied with. Her name is Sally Kempton, by the way. Um, and I was, and there's certain meditations of hers that I do all the time, like almost every day for years. And for some reason, when I was on her site and, looking at meditations, all of a sudden I started doing all these other ones. And I was like, this is interesting. Like, why all of a sudden? It wasn't my conscious intention to do other meditations, but I just started going there. And and then I went to her main website, her personal website, and there was a notice that said she had just passed, like a week or two before. And I was like, wow, maybe she's leading me to other, her spirit is leading me to some of the other meditations that, I need this point in my spiritual journey or something like that. I was just so wild. But anyway, for me, this all makes sense. Like that there's this energy. And when I found out she had passed, it's about the time I started doing this whole talk for the Jyotish astrology. So at the moment that I saw this chart, even though it wasn't August 1st, um, I was connecting with that energy of, difficulty passing on of a maternal figure in a spiritual lineage who was offering like an oral tradition, teaches an oral tradition, very nurturing energy. And that the other thing about this is, again, because the moon is aspecting as the fourth house or the 10th house, which is Cancer, it's again passing on the torch. And I kind of got this, even though I've been teaching meditation myself for years, it was even like with her, what I felt like her guiding me to do more of her meditations and different ones. It was, she was sort of passing on her energy to me to do more teaching of meditation, stuff like that. So, yeah, it seems like that's coming my way. But anyway, so just a personal example of how this energy is playing out. So then we have the new moon, 16th of August, in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. So this is the, I started getting into this a little bit. So the Lugna here, rising sign is Cancer or Karka. It's ruled by the moon. Moon is in its own sign. The moon is in Aslesha. The sun is in Aslesha. Venus is in Aslesha. The Lugna is in Aslesha. There's a lot of that snake energy here. Um, so again, um, but luckily, because the moon is in its own sign, even though it's a new moon, I think it brings positive energy to this moment. And the Venus retrograde, there's some strength there. Venus is also a benevolent planet. Um, so I think that overall, even though there might be, it's unexpected and maybe a little bit jarring, I would say, because it comes from out of the blue. I think it's overall going to be a healing moment. Um, and again, as I mentioned, you can see here, Sun and Moon are in the last degree. That gives a little bit of instability. You can also see here that Ascendant and Venus are right on top of each other within a degree. So what that means is that's going to take the Ascendant and Venus are going to be kind of linked together, and it's going to travel through all the subzodiacs. So I didn't look at it, but I'm guessing. If I were to look, I'm guessing that if I looked at the Devamsha, which is the ninth division of the subzodiacs, which represents like spouse or partner, um, uh, that Venus would be in the Lugna there as well. And the thing is, if you have Venus in the lugna of your D9 or Navamsha, that chart, it can indicate difficulties with partner, spouse. And so this, um, again, would potentially indicate a healing moment in that area of relationships. Yeah. And emotions definitely, because Cancer is an emotional, watery sign. The thing though is that Venus at this moment is combust. So what that means when a planet is combust, it means that the outward manifestations of that planet are not likely to manifest, or not much, and but the energy of the planet are more deeply felt within. And so Venus is about love and compassion and romance and that sort of thing. Empathy, grace, social grace. Even though outwardly there may not be so much of that on a deep level, again, this looks to me like deep emotional healing in a relationship. And here, though, that healing happens within the mind, in the emotions, and then it has a chance to manifest, once Venus comes out the other side of this combustion situation on, what was it, the 18th of August. So just a couple days later. Yeah. So again, the healing happens within, and then probably see in your relationship. What else? And then the sun here represents general health and vitality. So there's also this healing of, I would guess from this that there's been some sort of emotional or relationship issue that's been draining the mind and the body, heart. And so all of that is, kind of gets us like, I almost like that, because this Aslesha is like a fast, quick, snake bite energy. It's like this chiropractic treatment or something, almost like this emotional chiropractic treatment. Um, yeah. And the other thing is that because the moon and Venus are both eclipsed by the sun, because they're so close to the sun, you basically only see the sun here. And the sun represents things like authority, leadership, but also purpose and career. So this might, if it's not a relationship, then this is like your health. This is some sort of leadership, life, again, life mission, like something that's been bottled up inside is like, um, is ending, some cycle is ending, and we're starting to see healing in the next round. The other thing about this is that this is a Sudarshan Lagna. And what does that mean? Well, Sudarshan Lagnas, you can only get them at the time of a new or dark moon. Um, what that means is that the Lagna, the moon, and the sun are all in the same constellation or Rashi. Um, and what that signifies is that there's a strength here, because the moon, the mind, the sun, the soul, and the lugna, the body, are all on the same line. They're all in parallel. They're all working together in a similar direction. They're not opposed to each other or sort of side angling each other. So again, whatever this is, it's going to be like whoop, a very direct forward moving energy when this happens. There's also a Saraswati yoga here in this configuration of planets, not just in the Lugna, but you have Venus, Jupiter, Mercury in certain spots. So together that represents a Saraswati yoga. So we're talking like arts and education. That could be part of what's going on here. Excuse me. And then if we move around the chart here, if we go to the second house is also going to be important because we have Mars and Uttara Phalguni. Uttara Phalguni is similar to Purva Phalguni. It's, that hammock, swinging in the hammock, relaxation, rest, enjoyment, energy, arts, culture. The main difference, though, between Uttara Phalguni and Purva Phalguni is that Uttara Phalguni also has this added dimension of wanting to help others and do good and be charitable. So, this sort of taking this leisure type notion or energy and using that extra, this sort of extra resources and directing it to helping other people. So there's some, again, charitable thing here. Mercury's in Purva Phalguni, so there's still that relaxation energy. And then we have all these planets like aspecting the second house. Second house represents savings, family, speech, yeah, and especially because with Mercury and Jupiter aspecting this house, and they both represent communication. It looks like there's part of what's going on here is there's a communication reconfiguration that happens. So maybe there's a decision to up the communication with a loved one. Like once this internal emotional healing happens, there's a desire, excuse me, there's a desire to reconfigure the communication patterns in this relationship. That's a possibility. Um, Saturn, again, is, deep here in the eighth house of chronic illness and disease, death, inheritance, even other people's money, also esoterica. So, and then you have the Saturn, that's in Shatabisha again, 100 healers. That's aspecting the second house. You have Jupiter and Rahu again in Bharani and Ashwini aspecting the second house. So again, there's this indication of like sudden healing of a chronic issue, a chronic structural issue, and also deep within the psyche because the eighth house represents, depth in the psyche. So, and Saturn is like perseverance. So this is some like I want to say like ancient pattern deep in the psychology um, that is being shifted here. Really, that's probably been part of the issue of why this came up. Whatever this issue was, and but it looks like there's a reconfiguration here of that. The other thing with Saturn being Swa again in its own constellation retrograde, this is this massive, massive Saturn in the eighth house. Whenever you have a super strong planet like that, or Rahu and Ketu in the eighth house, you can get somebody who has a alternative psychology. Someone who's an unusual thinker, or free-minded person, or whatever. So it could even be something like kind of like what I was mentioning in the last chart, maybe some deep meditation or a spiritual practice because Ayurveda and Jyotish are actually associated with eighth house because there are these hidden, unusual, esoteric um, things, practices. Um, and so maybe there's some meditation or something that you do that brings insight and deep healing. And then because of that release, emotional release, there's now an ability or interest even or motivation to restructure communications in a relationship. That could happen. So let's see. What else do we have here? We have Mars aspecting into the fifth house of intellect, and we have Saturn aspecting there as well. When you have Mars and Saturn together, again, you get kind of an engineering combination. Um, but again, this is going to be a bit transformative with how the mind is working. Again, reconfiguring things. Eighth house, I mentioned. The 10th house. So, there's also this, if this is in a relationship, this could also be a shift in career, whatever sort of mental epiphany or emotional epiphany is cleared or healed in this moment. Um, it looks like there's going to be forward movement in the 10th house of career or ambition, fame, sort of thing. Because you have Rahu, the planet representing ambition and drive, and Jupiter representing expansion. And then you have Saturn. So again, Saturn is not only reconfiguring communication patterns here, but also potentially the career. Because again, once this emotional healing happens, it kind of clears the way for new activity, um, new motivations and stuff to take forward. And again, the 10th house, besides representing like, ambition, career, fame, also represents things like spirituality and sky. And then you wrap that up with the esoteric and in India potential aspects from the super strong Saturn in the eighth house. we could be talking something like Jyotish. And so I don't know if a bunch of people are all of a sudden going to, be interested in studying Jyotish, but something like that is possible, it looks like. So that's the new moon. So, as you know, if you've been watching my videos, I like to find charts on people, places, and times that represent the current sky patterns going on. And so this chart popped up. It is the storming of the Bastille in Paris, France. So when did this happen? So the data, 14th of July, 1789, 4:11 a.m., which is dawn, Paris time back then. Uh, that's the data I used to generate this chart. So let's look at it. So we have another Cancer Karka Lugna. Um, so again, emotional energy. And Cancer lugnas tend to have a high intellect, but be emotional as well. And sometimes their emotions sway them beyond their intellect. Um, the lugna here is in Punarvasu rather than Aslesha. So rather than having this like sudden biting energy, there's still a sharpness because Punarvasu is the symbol of that is a quiver of arrows. So the tip of the arrow is sharp. But there's this energy of like, resting in a place like the quiver and then the arrow going out and coming back. So that's the energy going on here. Cancer is ruled by the moon. We talked about that. Active water sign. And we talked about the emotions edging out intellect at times. So this is a bright moon as opposed to the new moon that we just saw. The moon here is an Uttara Bhadrapada. The symbol there is the back legs of a funeral cot. So, okay, now we're getting, energies of passing away and ending of cycles. And also, the moon is in the 12th constellation of Pisces, and the natural zodiac, the 12th constellation or 12th house is related to endings. Yeah, so kind of double up on the meaning of ending there between the nakshatra and constellation or Rashi. The moon has gone to the ninth house of government, father authority. It's conjoined with Saturn, so and that's in Purva Bhardrapada, the front legs of the funeral cot. So again, we have funeral cot, two planets with this funeral cot symbolism, energy. Saturn retrogrades as a strong Saturn, the planet representing death, destruction. And the Saturn being on the moon, that means that this time was a sadhisati. So if you're not familiar with sadhisati, sadhisati is a 7.5 year period where it's Saturn goes through the constellation before the moon, through the moon, and after the moon. So each constellation that Saturn passes through takes about 2.5 years to go. So to go through the constellation before, during, and after the moon is 3 constellations. So 3 times 2.5 is 7.5 years, more or less. So, and Sati Sati is significant. A lot of people fear it. It happens every 29 years as Saturn goes, again, it goes through its whole cycle, finishes its cycle. But so Sati Sati in general, there is sometimes a lot of people fear it. That's not always the case though. I mean, definitely some good things can come out of Sati Sati. Actually, my last Sati Sati is when I learned Jyotish. So it cleared the way in some ways for me to open up to Jyotish. So it worked for me, although it was still a difficult time in other ways. But Sadhisati, generally, I think if there's a ubiquitous quality to sadhisati, it usually means that people lose a pretty significant support system in their life. So sometimes they say, like, the first sadhisati is when you lose your grandparents. The second sadhisati of your life, you tend to lose your parents. And then the third sadhisati, you might lose yourself because most people won't live through 3 sadhisatis. Um, but there's this energy here, and again, being in the house of authority, government, um, Saturn on the moon, so losing support, funeral cot, last constellation of the zodiac, like we're ending the government here, which is essentially what Storming of the Bastille was. So that's all very clear. And you have Jupiter aspecting this. Um, Jupiter's in Pushya. So Pushya again is symbolized by cow's udder. So there's still like a gentle energy here, and Jupiter can represent things like philosophy, um, law. So clearly those things are involved here because it was a whole like new dawn of a new age for France, essentially. Oh, and the reason why I ended up, it might seem sort of random, but how did I find Storming of the Bastille? For some reason, I was looking at France, looking for national birth chart for France, and when I was looking for that, I got information like there, I guess France is on its fifth republic now. And so every, I don't know, 15 or 20 years since the storming of the Bastille, there's been like a new version. Um, and I don't know, like that just seemed like I was like, which one do I pick? And I looked at the Fifth Republic because that's the newest one, and I don't know, it's kind of didn't feel right to me. And I was like, what about these other ones? Like, if it changed every 20 years, there's not like a stability here. Like, there's not an overall gestalt, for France. And so I think in the hearts and minds, I'm guessing, I'm not French. I know some French people. I speak some French, some a little bit, aware of French culture and thought, but not too much so, I would say. But I would say in the hearts and minds of people, like they still talk about the storming of the Bastille as like that was like the dawn of a new age and the dawn of a new France. So that's where I kind of end up going because all the other data I was getting was just like it was confusing me and I was like it didn't feel right. Um and so even my process it's kind of funny. My process of weighing emotions and intellect and thought is sort of playing out in this whole Cancerian energy that I And also, Mercury's going retrograde, and I could feel that energy. I know it's like 3 weeks out, but I'm sensitive to mercurial energy. And so, all the little details, they were like niggling at me while I was putting this together. So, I was just feeling all those energies. Anyway, let's get back to the chart. So, it's just funny. The reason why I bring this up, not to talk about myself so much, but it's like, these energies permeate through even these readings and stuff like that, and your reader. Um, but this Jupiter and Pusha, so even there was a stirring of the Bastille, and even the words used of stirring of the Bastille are so strong. I'm not sure the actual day was so bad. It's just based on what I'm seeing here. Like I think it was not that hard of a fight because they started in the dawn, and I think it was over by the end of the day. So it wasn't like this long drawn out thing. I'm guessing that maybe the people fighting to save the remnants of the current government or royal monarchy, I guess, probably were on the side of the people because the people rushed in, you know, and kind of took this over. But it doesn't seem like it was much of a fight. This is what I'm seeing here. Seems like it, pushed over, like they kind of maybe did what they had to do. But again, it didn't seem like there was much of a fight here. But anyway, Jupiter also represents things like spirituality and graciousness and shining into, aspecting into the 12th house, its own sign. It's going to bring even more pleasantness to this ending of the government. Um, Not necessarily the royalty, because they that was a different story for them. But I think the monarchy itself, it was kind of on its way out anyway. Looks like. There is also a parivartana yoga, so there's an exchange of houses between Jupiter and the Moon. So that's going to make the first house stronger and the 12th house stronger. It's also going to bring a lot more Jupiter and Moon energy to the whole chart. So Moon, motions, public, um, intuition, imagination, Jupiter, philosophy, government, law, high-mindedness, that sort of thing. So that's a lot of that energy is going to be, permeating through the chart, not just because both of those planets are linked to the lugna now, but because, like Jupiter aspects 5, 7, and 9 away from wherever it is. So if we move Jupiter anywhere, it's kind of nice. Like, some parivartanas, if they involve Jupiter, that's usually It can be a good thing typically. It depends though on whether Jupiter might be a Chidra graha. That's a piercing planet. That can be a planet representing yeah, vulnerability. Um, but yeah, and then here in this chart, like Jupiter, for example, is the ruling planet for the eighth house of enemies. But again, Jupiter's in Pushya, so to me, that's telling me that the enemies here weren't really enemies. Like they were kind of like probably just putting on a show to say, okay, yeah, I protected the Bastille, but they were probably actually on the side of the public deep down. Like they were probably tired of what was going on. They were ready to move on, but they still had their job to do, to go through the motions. That's what I'm guessing or what I'm seeing here. Um, and what else? Let's see. So it strengthens, and then there's a Saraswati yoga. So that's another planet combination that's bringing in this energy of arts and education to this whole chart. Which again, even though I've labeled it storming of the Bastille, essentially what this is the formation of the new conception of France. So this is the energy of France. And when I looked at this chart, this one felt more like France than, again, like the Fifth Republic. And I think I looked at the Third Republic and a few of the republics, and I was like, these don't feel right. But this one did. So, um, and again, with this parivartana, the chart is dominated by both because now you have Jupiter aspecting six planets and the moon aspecting five. Um, so let's break down the first house a little bit. So Sun is in Punarvasu. And the sun is in the same degree as the lugna. So kind of like what we talked about in one of the previous moon charts, the sun and the lugna, since they're right on top of each other, that the sun is going to be at the top of the chart of most of the subzodiacs. So again, sun represents king, literally. It represents authority, represents government. So we're talking new, um, you know, um, new government, and that's going to be key here. There's also Mercury's combust. It's in Punarvasu as well, so there's this going back and forth energy. With Mercury being combust, you're not going to again see the outward manifestation of Mercury, but the inner manifestation of like an outer manifestation of Mercury would be like detail oriented, analytical, rational, um, like accounting, like I think of accountants and stuff like that, which isn't really the vibe of France. On an outward level, but in an inward level, we'd be talking about like a sharp hidden intellect, which I think definitely is again the essence of French culture. Like people like today still, which instead of being on their phones, people will be at like bus stops and stuff, and they'll have a book on philosophy in their purse that they carry around. Like I don't see that happening here in the United States unless you live in a university town or something like that, and you're taking a class on philosophy. It's just not the general public isn't walking around with those sorts of interests and potentially values. Venus is exalted. Oh, excuse me, Venus is not exalted, but Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. And Venus and Jupiter are both in Pushya. So again, that's even more of this like social grace, conviviality, luxury. We're talking because Venus is like the finer things of life and Jupiter is like high-mindedness. So rich, luxurious, high culture. Like, and, that's a lot of what France presents itself as in the world. And it is, compared to other countries. There is also here, I have here, Venus and Jupiter are just about to go into planetary war. Um, they're about a day away, day and a half away. I looked it up. And so that can represent like um, a clash or of ideals which is Jupiter, because Jupiter is like high-minded philosophy, and Venus is like the practical counselor, so reality. Like, how do we ground, our thoughts, our philosophy with what's happening, in front of our faces, in front of our eyes. But the thing is, this is a pretty, this isn't like a down and out, dragged out, fist fight or something. We have Venus and Jupiter like at war here, so it's more like a pillow fight. um, yeah. What else? We have a Pravraja yoga here, so with four planets being in the same house, that gives focus or concentration. And because it's in the first house here, we're talking about like self and identity. So clearly, this was a huge moment for the identity of France. Um, and all these planets, this Pravraja Yoga, all this aspects of seventh house of relationships. And so it impacts things like that. And especially because you have Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, those are all, especially Mercury can swing either way, but when you have like Venus and Jupiter there, Mercury's going to be a benevolent planet. Um, all this into the seventh house, we're going to have businesses of luxury. We're also going to have relationships of diplomacy. And so that's also probably part of why French became known as a language of diplomacy. English is used probably more widely now because more people, it's just more pragmatic because more people really speak English. But, not so long ago, it was really French that was used to um, be diplomatic. The other thing is that, again, with this Venus, Jupiter, Mercury combination, we're talking high mindedness. So politeness is very important here in this country as part of the culture. What else do we have here? We have the fifth house. We have Rahu here, and we have Mars aspecting here, and we have Jupiter aspecting here. So the fifth house is intellect, creativity, and it's in Scorpio. So we're talking like transformative energy. Rahu's in Anuradha. So again, Anuradha is a nakshatra that indicates victory, but through bridge building rather than like just burning everything down with a lot of collateral damage. So Rahu's ambition. So there's ambition here that's like successful and well received in both intellect and creativity. And again, that's the gestalt of France. So arts, but there's going to be unusual aspects here, but it's going to be strong, ambitious, enthusiasm, depth, fiery. These are the sorts of qualities of this fifth house here. And again, you have the aspect of the exalted Jupiter, Mars, and Mars. This Mars aspect, Mars is in Rohini. Rohini is a nakshatra that's again arts, and also like attractiveness. Like Rohini is as the mythical woman was the most of the um 27 wives of, I want to say Jupiter. Maybe not Jupiter. I think Jupiter. Um, she was sought after. Like she was the most attractive wife. And so Jupiter, I think, don't quote me on that, but Jupiter like just started chasing her down. So, and so I think there is a sort of like attractive, seductive quality of French. That's sort of what they're known for. Um, Whether they live up to it or not, there's still this like attraction, I think, to the culture. And the thing is, when Mars aspects into that Scorpio, it's going to bring strength to that. So again, intellect strong, arts, creativity, innovation, and with Jupiter and Mars there together, we're talking also like law and philosophy. So that's going to create just a general intellect of somebody who's like a philosopher, artisan, sort of thing. And then if we get to, let's see, we talked about the ninth house. If we get to the 11th house, we have Mars and Ketu here. Kritika is a nakshatra that represents like both, it can it's kind of a dual nakshatra. It can represent both nurturing, kind of a foster mother type energy, and also contrasting to that is like the celestial chief of the army, like warrior, because it's with Mars. And K2 is in this like this is probably more of a again army um, military type energy, but it's aspected by Saturn from the ninth house. So we're going to hear engineering, and the 11th house represents clubs, group, society. So what we're getting here with this combination is like engineering, innovative, unusual, and I would even say combative, explosive societies. Frankly, so that's part of the if this was a person being born, despite the high-mindedness, this is somebody who's going to fight for their ideals, and that's essentially like even right now, part of why I think part of why France came to mind. Oh, I did another chart later that brought France to mind, and then the things going on in France with like all the protests and stuff. It kind of reminded me. I went to Berkeley as my undergraduate college. Berkeley is known for all its protests and its like social activism from like the 60s and 70s. And so, as an undergraduate on the campus, and it's a huge campus. I think there's like 45,000 students, if that's still correct. Um, and it was like literally you would have multiple groups protesting in the student plaza daily. So it's kind of like, oh, what are we protesting today? It was like the protest du jour, and you can almost sort of start tuning it out because there's so many protests. It's not like it's like, catches your eye anymore or catches your ear anymore. You're just like, oh, okay, there's another protest. It kind of gets bland. And France is sort of like that. Like there are all these protests that go on in France. What's also funny though is like they tend not to protest during like heavy traffic times. So there's still this like social politeness. It's again like one of these things where there's like this balance of like social politeness and diplomacy with fighting for ideals. So again, all of this is in the chart, and all of this was coming through. And again, I think um to me this chart exemplifies France, but again, I might be wrong. So, this might be just my opinion, but it seems to fit pretty well. And also in the corner here on the left, so the starting dasha here was Saturn, Jupiter. So again, Saturn is this, and Jupiter together, that's definitely going to be in the ninth house because Saturn is, as a planet, is there, and then it's Pisces, so which is ruled by Jupiter. So the ninth house is going to be prominent. So again, we're talking government authority, and death of law, which you could think about it that way if you want to think about it simply, but still probably works. Um, and then what's interesting also to me was I was looking at the dasha sequence. So that's the planetary period sequence, the planets that are kind of not necessarily most active, but maybe more prominent, and they're kind of they kind of how do we say they kind of set the tone for a certain period of life, certain energy cycles of life. So what's interesting to me was on the 14th of July, we were in Saturn Jupiter, and then 2 months later, September 12th, we move not just like a bukti, so sub period, but like the whole dasha. Like we go from Saturn to Mercury. And so Saturn is like tradition, um, antiquity, the way things have always been done, which is like the monarchy. And then Mercury is like reason, irrationality. And so again, even in the Shah sequence, within a cut like this, it's like the Bastille, storming the Bastille moment happened right at the shift of this huge the Shah sequence. Yeah, so monarchy to rationality, balance, fairness, so it's all here in the chart. So yeah, enjoy that. All right, so what is the sun doing this month in August? So Surya in Sanskrit. So August 3rd enters Aslesha Nakshatra. I mentioned that with one of the moon slides. So again, the sun represents things like general health, vitality, career, purpose. So especially being in Aslesha with that Moon and Venus retrograde. We're talking some sort of healing, even if it's sort of like sudden or unexpected. Medically, this might be something like myocardial infarction, or heart attack, stroke, or pulmonary embolus. Because also Cancer is the fourth house in the natural zodiac, and the fourth house represents the chest, um, lungs, heart, that area. And so, if there is some sort of event, it looks like it will be taken care of. Um, Especially with Aslesha, again, a snake energy, like something just sudden, like a bite, it's suddenly like the health shifts. So it looks like there's going to be if something like happens, it looks like there's going to be, for the most part, again, everybody's going to be different. So, um, in terms of what planetary periods they're running, what these planets look like and are doing in their natal chart, and what they look like in the subcharts. But it looks like there's going to be some benevolent energy surrounding this event if it happens to be medical. So it looks like there's going to be some benevolence here. Um, and again, individual outcomes will vary, obviously. So 17th of August, Sun enters Leo, its own sign, or Simha in Sanskrit, and also simultaneously enters Magha nakshatra. I mentioned Magha is symbolized by a throne. So Sun is the king entering Leo. Its Sun is going to be on its throne in August 17th. And Sun is a fire planet, so there's going to be some energy, power, energy, authority, leadership, also ancestors. Um, because Magha not only is symbolized by a throne, but Magha, the star of Magha, is Regulus, which is the heart of the lion, which is the constellation of Leo. So the heart of the lion, and in again Indian culture, it's thought that ancestors, when they pass on, they go to Regulus, they go to Magha, and they reside there. So it's not only this nakshatra that represents kind of royalty and tradition that way, but it represents royalty and tradition in terms of like a personal lineage. So, um, and what's interesting here, when Sun shifts signs, every planet except Venus and Ketu will be involved. So, Um, yeah, so that's going to be fairly intense. So, again, that's because Rahu and Jupiter are aspecting, Sun is aspecting, Mars and Mercury will be there. So there's going to be some intensity happening there. And that I think may correspond with the energy this time of year when Sun enters its own sign. It's a lot of fire and power, but also like potentially redirection of like life mission and career, important things in life, what you spend a majority of your time doing, um, and developing. So this might correspond with the Lion's Gate. Again, I haven't heard anybody talk about that. I don't know too much about it, but I'm hearing a lot of Western astrologers bring that up. It's supposed to happen around August 8th, and there's supposed to be a big shift of energy. So I'll look into that just to see what that's about. But again, we don't typically talk about that in Jyotish, but I could see where the sun entering its own sign is going to be a major, shift in a lot of ways. And because sun is in its own house, it's going to dominate the house. But what's interesting is Saturn's going to dominate the chart because Saturn is still aspecting Rahu, Jupiter, Sun, Mercury, Mars. So that's a lot of intense energy. You have this very fiery planet Sun, with Saturn, which is a very windy planet, and again, this tension of like nobility, royalty, lineage, purpose with tradition, but also longevity. Um, like I could see how this is like not just like how am I gonna let me get a new job, to pay the bills, but it's like if I'm, I don't know, middle aged, 45, 50 or whatever, and I've been working for a while, and it's sort of like who knows? Maybe I have another 20, 30 years left on the planet. Like, what do I want to spend the rest of my time doing? You know, um, maybe it's time to get more focused or get more clear or get more concentrated or have a specific project, that I'm working on. So I could see that happening here. On the 27th of August, Saturn has an exact aspect with Sun. So we're literally going to have like a mashup here of these two very strong planets. And again, with Saturn and Sun, sort of at each other there at cross purposes to some extent, I could see a restructuring above things I mentioned. So again, a restructuring of career and purpose could be happening, some insights there. Um, and that might correspond with, because the sun entering Leo, right, is happening right after that new moon where the emotional insights come up. And then with the emotional insights, again, comes this like, what do I really want to do with my life energy, right? And then there's a restructuring that happens. So it looks like that's all on board. And that's why the theme of this month, I think, is like restructuring or redefining your life purpose. Because I think that's on board for this month. End of the month, August 31st, enters Purva Phalguni Nakshatra. So, as I mentioned, um, uh, let me just check on that. Hold on a second. I wrote down Purva Phalguni. I need to check and see if it's actually Purva Phalguni. I think. Yes, no, that's correct. That's correct. Sorry. Because I think I switched this up, and that's that whole Mercury retrograde thing. There were so many like typos and things as I was going through. I was like, wow, this is like more than I usually deal with. I mean, I usually have a few, but it was like every slide was like, wow. So I was going back and forth, and like the dates and stuff. Everything was just like double, triple check. It was kind of crazy, but yeah, it's Mercury retrograde. So August 31st, Sun enters Purva Phalguni Nakshatra. So we're gonna go from this like kind of intensity. Once this kind of emotional epiphany happens, and this like kind of reassessment of like life purpose or career direction or whatever, and a restructuring happens, then it looks like it's time to relax and into life and move in that direction, because like the work here is really about thinking about it, um, and then making a move, and then sort of going with the flow, it looks like, after that. And so Purva Phalguni, again, the nakshatra, think about things like sweet speech, generosity, government, conjugal bliss, wealth, rest, relax, again, the hammock here, enjoyment, carefree time, creative arts, fame, renown, charisma, wandering, like travel, that sort of thing. So again, kind of the higher things in life. And if I remember correctly, I think this nakshatra is ruled by Venus, which would make sense because Venus represents a lot of these things as well. So that's Sun this month, or in August. Venus, Shukra, in August. So Venus is kind of doing its own thing this month, really. So August 6th, Venus goes combust, or asta. So whenever a planet goes combust, and again, I have a whole video on this. You will see less of the outer manifestations of the planet. So again, Venus is all about luxury and the good life, fine life, art, music, dance, fine dinners, all this sort of thing. Um, but you'll feel it more within. So the more internal qualities like love, romance, compassion, generosity, conviviality, those are all Venus as well. So again, since there's less of a external manifestation of the energy of Venus, you might not see your partner, like maybe they go on a business trip, or you do, or something, or other loved ones, or your vehicle, because Venus represents vehicles, travel, artwork, because Venus represents transportation and arts as well. But you might feel more compassionate and loving, even if you don't express it, you might feel it within. And if you feel it within, it might just sort of sort of waft off you like perfume, even if you don't have to be explicit about it, or you don't find yourself wanting or needing to be explicit about it. It'll just be your aura, your perfume, your energy that you carry around with you. So Venus is retrograde until September 3rd. So that also means, we're kind of reviewing and assessing the things above. So partnerships, transportation, vehicle, art, and this might correspond with this, not directly tied in with this whole sun uh, situation we have going on, where that looks like it's going to be, you know, loud and out there. Like it might be very obvious, like when there's a big shift. But Venus is kind of like going within and again reassessing. It's almost this Venus energy is almost like that new moon energy of like what do I really want? Because Venus is also desire. So what do I really want? And that's important to really get clear on that internally before you make some, big move with life direction, career, life purpose, that sort of thing. And then August 7th, Venus re-enters Cancer. We talked about in Aslesha with Moon and Sun. So there's a healing on a deep level because again, Venus is going to bring out the more positive aspects of Aslesha. Remember that snake energy. So more of the healing insights, that sort of thing. It could also be because Venus represents, romance and sexual nature and that sort of thing, sensuality. So, it might be about um, healing those qualities. Taking some time out to get more in touch with, the feeling nature and sensual nature and sexual nature of your being and doing some healing on those levels if you've been working too hard. Because again, Venus has been in the mix of all this like Saturnian energy and Mars and Mercury now and then Sun. So Venus has been around all these kind of like hardcore planets. And so it looks like Venus is going to go off on its own for a little bit and do a little bit of healing to kind of get grounded because there's a lot of noise with these other planets going. It might also be like a distance makes the heart grow fonder type thing. Maybe you've been so wrapped up with work that's affected your relationship or something like that. And so it's sort of like, let me just take some time out, get grounded, what do I really want moving forward? And it's like, oh yeah, I really do want this. And then again, it's almost like that Sudarshan Lagna that we talked about with the new moon, whatever, 16th or 17th of August, where it's like, heart, mind, body all lined up, as opposed to feeling like you're getting pulled in a different direction. And Venus is going to be part of that, heart, mind, body lined up, right? So, um, August 19th, Venus ends combustion. So, towards the end of the month, Venus is going to reemerge once it gets far enough away from the sun not to be eclipsed by it. And then the external manifestations will resume. And luckily, Venus, I think, is going to be in Cancer, I want to say till October. So it's going to have a little time to kind of, get its legs underneath it and kind of move forward in this new way. Um, again, whether it's a relationship or your artwork or something like that. um, to kind of get some stability and traction before it sort of moves forward. But it's going to be out of the fray of these other planets, which is kind of good for Venus, maybe, but maybe not so good for these other planets. Because Venus brings a lot of like social grace and goodness and graciousness and stuff like that. So Venus has been probably cushioning the blow of these other intense planets kind of going at each other, but it's probably taken a toll. Um, on the other aspects of life, like relationships and just, enjoying yourself, going on vacation or something. It's summertime here in the Northern Hemisphere. So there you go. Okay. So why did I bring this up? Well, again, I like to, World War II begins again. Intense. This is pretty intense. And I think I did this chart. Yeah, I did this chart before I did the chart on France or storming the Bastille, but there's actually some, similar energies in a way. Why did I bring this up? Because I was looking for charts that had similar energies to what's currently going on, like the current that's similar to the current sky pattern, and this popped up, and this seemed to have a lot of similarities. So let's go through this. World War II begins. All right, so we always start at the top in the Lugna rising sign, ascendant first house, because that permeates the energy there, permeates the rest of the chart, kind of sets the tone for the rest of the chart. Well, let me give you the data here, how, that I used to generate the chart. So September 1st, 1939 was the date, 4:47 a.m. That was dawn. And the first shot, essentially, blitzkrieg that happened here that officially began World War II, happened at Gdansk, Poland. There was a ship or submarine that shot the first shot, but essentially it was the whole frontier border between Poland and Germany, and Germany just like lined up along the whole Polish border and like just decimated, the region like out of the blue. So yeah. Anyway, that's the data that I used to generate this chart. So let's go through. So we have a Leo Simha Lagna, yeah, and it's in Magha, so throne. Leo's the stage, so we're talking about throne of the world stage, right? And that's essentially World War II was like Germany's move to for world domination, essentially. So we got it right there. Ruled by the sun. Sun is in Purva Phalguni, so this is like um one, again, the sun in its own constellation is going to give it strength. Um, you can see that it's the first house is also about the self and identity, kind of like the chart for storming the Bastille. Um, and again, I say it's in Purva Phalguni, which is like a hammock. So this might be from the perspective of the German side, like this was an easy win. But again, this is the energy moving into the whole kind of war, really World War II. So Germany probably thought this was going to be like an easy win, and it essentially was on this particular day. And in many ways, they probably people were just shocked at how well Germany did with their whole campaign, military campaign, and social campaign. I mean, how many millions of people like perished because of this? So it was sort of like because the Purva Falguni nakshatra I mentioned is like rest, relaxation, enjoyment, playtime, and I think in the mind of Germany, that's essentially what this is. Like, we're gonna go, we're just gonna kick some ass and take it over, and it's gonna be ours. Like, no problem. Like, was kind of what I'm getting from this. Uh, this whole thing. Uh, let's make sure that I'll get to it. Okay, I have it in the notes because there's something important here I see right now, but I wrote in the notes later, so I'll get to it. But so the sun, fiery energy in a fire constellation, a lot of energy, drive here. It's aspected by Mars, another fire planet. And if Sun is the king, Mars is commander in chief of the military. So you can see there's a lot of fire here. Mars is in Uttara. Uttara is symbolized by an elephant's tusk. So there's this piercing nature, again, that, just sudden ripping apart, which is like the whole blitzkrieg energy. Also, K2, you can take 5 and 9 aspects from K2. So K2 is an Ashwini. K2 is like this unusual, sudden energy in Ashwini. So first, pioneering competition. Um, and yeah, so, this is like Sun and Mars again, all this fire. You've got this K2, like unusual, just drive, just wild military campaign, which essentially it was. The other thing here is that you have, I didn't write that down, but it's obvious. But like, look at the lineup here. So the ascendant is at 1310 degrees, or 13 degrees 10 minutes. Then you have Venus at 13 degrees 30 minutes. I mean, Venus is right there with the ascendant. I mean, like not even half a degree away. It's like right on top. So that's going to travel through. And then you have the sun at 14 degrees 47. So that means that this whole combination of Venus, Sun, Ascendant is going to travel through many of the amshas or subzodiacs. And the thing is, Venus is combust. So this is where like some of these energies, that we're seeing this month, it's there's going to be some intensity. And Venus, because we're not exhibiting or manifesting its combust, we're not going to see the external manifestations of Venus like conviviality, generosity, compassion. I mean, this is like a no mercy, wild, hidden, unexpected military campaign. Like just boom and blitzkrieg. Yeah, that's blitzkrieg right here. Um, yeah, the other thing that's interesting about the whole chart before I get to um yeah, so the Lugna is like wild. But oh, the other thing I was going to talk about the whole chart is that you see that there are five planets in what we consider negative houses. We have Rahu in the third house, Mars in the sixth house, Moon and Jupiter in the eighth house, and Mercury in the 12th. So 5 out of 9 planets are in negative houses. This is indication what we would consider a Balarishta yoga or a childhood ailment yoga, combination of planets. And so sometimes when we see this many planets in negative houses with a birth chart, that indicates that there may be difficulty in childhood, and possibly illness, that sort of thing. So, and maybe even death if it's really extreme. But this is something that's giving indication here that there's going to be problems with this, and it probably may not be long lasting. So there's an indication there. Let's go through. We'll walk through the chart. So if we go from the first house to the third, so again in North Indian style chart, you count counterclockwise. So we have Rahu here. Rahu's in Swati. Swati is symbolized by new grass blowing in the wind. So there's some fragility here actually, and some hidden aspects. And the third house represents technology as well as communication. So that's essentially like Germany was like fantastic with that. I mean, just hidden, the coding system, language codes to pass on their orders, and the military technology. I mean, it was like unsurpassed, and that's part of why they were so successful, especially in the beginning. Um, but let's see. And also you have Saturn mixed in here. You have Saturn aspecting this. So, Saturn represents metals and things of the earth, that sort of thing. So, sudden iron technology. And also the third house represents neighbors, brothers. So that's essentially what Germany did was, storm their neighbor. And again, there's this also like, because it's the third house, we're talking about like, unusual, bizarre rhetoric, behind the whole campaign. And Saturn and Ketu are in, Ashwini, which is like this kind of savior energy. It's like the twins, like the healing, celestial healing twins, the Kumara twins. And Saturn represents death. So it's like this bizarre, twisted, unusual communication campaign. And this is coming from the government, ninth house, of death as savior. That's what I was getting from this. And so it's like this whole like, eugenics, like, let's exterminate these folks and their genes and we'll purify society this way. Like it's wild. Like, yeah, this is really hardcore and then the thing is you have Mars, which is a planet representing energy enemies in the sixth house of enemies, overt enemies, aspecting Saturn. You have wrapped up in this like military, hardcore military campaign that's just, wild. Mars is also in Capricorn where it's exalted there. So, you know, The government is enemy. You could, because of this combination or this relationship between the sixth house and the ninth house, the government is enemy, but also strong enemies such as like the allied forces. That's all here. Um, and also like Mars, like it's an Uttara shadow, which I said was symbolized by an elephant tusk. So there's this piercing nature, but also the enemies, like Uttara Shada um, Nakshatra has this energy of being fairly high-minded. So the enemies of the government, meaning the allied forces, were actually fairly high-minded, like trying to contain this. But it was a pretty wild endeavor. Um, and so this ambition, because Rahu represents ambition, was like again fragile in nature. This rhetoric was fragile in nature, even though it was convincing. Like, there's still some strength to it. I mean, because it was strong, it clearly like swayed people, but deep at its core was just the philosophy of it was lacking. So we move on to the sixth house. So I mentioned exalted Mars, so strong Mars in the sixth house, the graha of enemies, planet of enemies, and the house of enemies, piercing star. I mentioned all that, and the aspect of Saturn brings this energy in the ninth house. So again, when you have this, and the thing is, Saturn from the ninth house aspects Mars. So you actually have Mars aspecting Saturn and Saturn aspecting Mars. So it kind of like doubles up with when you have Mars and Saturn together, you can get things like workaholic, just like massive drive, athleticism, and also military, which was all things that were displayed in this campaign by Germany. The eighth house here, this was interesting. So, eighth house here, we have Moon in Pisces with a Swa Jupiter. And so Jupiter's in its own house in Pisces, in Uttara Bhadrapada. So I talked about in other charts, like the moon or Uttara Bhadrapada, that nakshatra, the symbol of that is the back legs of a funeral pyre. So again, we're talking about death and destruction here. The Pisces is the last constellation of the natural zodiac. Um, Yeah, so the philosophy here, so again, and the eighth house represents like hidden things and also deep psychology. So again, it's a bit twisted here. Moon represents public, again, on a funeral pyre. Jupiter retrograde in Pisces. This is massive, massively strong Jupiter, but it's in the eighth house of like death, destruction, inheritance, chronic disease, and they're both in this nakshatra of um, uh, represented by a funeral pyre. What I was getting here was like mass extermination of people, the public. Yeah, yeah, this is a pretty intense chart. And also hidden because again, the eighth things of the eighth house are tend to be hidden, and so there's like this veiling of how much extermination is going on. The other thing is that these people who were passing away were innocent. Jupiter is a very high-minded planet. It's super strong. Um, and so there's unfortunately the death of many innocent people. And also not just people, but like charity and goodness and idealism, like all these like high-minded philosophical notions. I mean, people going through this experience are probably like, humanity is collapsed, not just physically, but just the goodness in people. Like it brought the worst. It probably brought out the worst in some people and the best in other people. But on the surface level, um, again, the deep thinking philosophy here was about exterminating public, a lot of people um, who happen to be innocent. Yeah. The other thing, so um, I wrote here Chidragraha. Oh, if I remember correctly, Moon and Jupiter are both Chidragrahas for this chart. So Chidragrahas are planets that represent places of vulnerability and kind of like a vulnerable area. Um, so there's going to be a lot of really trauma. That's where it comes to mind because of this. The other thing is that this Jupiter is super strong Jupiter's aspecting the 12th house. The 12th house represents hidden enemies. And so not only were a lot of innocent people, killed during this campaign or this war, but a lot of innocent people actually like went underground and were part of the resistance to this massive, assault by Germany. So that also happened. And the thing is, because Pisces is a dual sign, you're going to have two stories for every, for whatever happens and that whatever shows up and presents itself in that house. So a lot of innocent people passed, but a lot of innocent people also like became hidden enemies. And even really you could see this because if you look at we'll get to the 12th house. I'm kind of skipping over that, but I guess we'll do the 12th house and go back to the ninth house, which was kind of started on. But so you have in the 12th house, you have Mercury, so that's like rationality, communication. You have Jupiter aspecting there, so that's more communication. But also like this goodness and Pisces again, it's a water sign, so you have this like just really super benevolent and even like kind of like a spiritual nature here. Um, that caused people to become part of the resistance and hide people or give people food or whatever. But you also have um, Mars from the sixth house aspecting into the 12th house. So again, Mars represents things like rebelliousness, yeah, and it represents things like enemies. So we're getting more of this enemy energy through the planet with the house that represents hidden enemies. So, and when you have Mercury and Mars together like this, with a strong Jupiter, when you have Mercury and Mars together, Mercury is the rational mind and communication, and Mars can be, if it's in a negative house or negatively conditioned, it can represent things like thievery. So when you have thieves with the mind and communication, that's like lying. It can be a liar's combination. um, because lying is essentially mental theft. So Mercury's the rational mind, and Mars is stealing, essentially. And then, but you have this massively strong Jupiter shining onto the 12th house. So this would be innocent, innocent or good, high-minded people lying, hiding themselves, lying. To essentially like confront in a hidden way because they couldn't do it in an overt way this like onslaught of just unprecedented military force. Yeah, so and spies, like you could see it that way, like spies, I mean, they still lie and kill and steal and all sorts of things, but their mission is to actually help rebalance society and rid themselves of individuals who are just too destructive for mass society and stuff like that. So and then this, the other thing when I saw this Mercury in the 12th house, I mean, Mercury represents the rational mind. I mean, it's like just that alone is like loss of reason and communication because it was a crazy time and you couldn't really speak directly, even if you weren't like a spy, even if you weren't like part of the resistance, like hiding people or whatever. You couldn't tell people if you were Jewish or a gypsy or what you did. You couldn't really speak because you never knew what people were going to do with that information. And it was a crazy time. You didn't know who to trust either. So it went both ways. So yeah, some craziness there. And then the ninth house, we have Saturn, Ketu, and Ashwini, which I mentioned is like this twisted notion of being a savior by killing people. Exalted by Mars, again, you get this, military, fiery, destructive energy, more of it. So this ninth house is just explosive. So you get like authority, father, king, and again, not just like if the king of all this, like the father of all this. I mean, this is like this ninth house is actually representing Hitler because he was like the king, essentially the driver, not the king. That's not literally the king, but head statesman, I guess you would say. Um, this whole ninth house, military, explosive, deadly technology, weapons, prowess, like just unrelenting. The other thing is you have Ketu, if you have the ascendant Venus and Sun all pretty much in the first degree, in the same degree of each other. Look at Ketu and Saturn. I mean, it's like Ketu and Saturn are within a degree of each other. So that's going to travel through the rest of these. So it's just like, I mean, just the moment that they picked, it's just like, wow. I mean, just it's mind-boggling how deep. So this energy of this whole chart, the ascendant as well as the government, is going to travel through all the subzodiacs. And let's look at that actually. So I have a few of them here. So I just pulled out a few, but you can see for yourself. So I have in the top here, this top one is the D10, the Dashamsha. This represents power and status, even fame. And look at this. I mean, again, Sun and Venus ascendant, this little yellow saffron circle here, it's all in the Lugna in the first house because those are all wrapped up in the first degree. So we're going to get this whole combination here. And you have Saturn and Ketu together. So that travel together. And then look, you have Sun, Rahu, Venus, Mercury in the first house. You have Mars aspecting into the first house from the 10th house. And you have Saturn and Ketu. Saturn, is aspecting the first house. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planets on the Lugna. When you have that many, when you have more than three or more planets on the Lugna of a subzodiac, that means that subzodiac is very important. So we're talking power, status here. That's the name of the game. That's like, wow, this is like intense. This is an intense D10 Dashamsha. Then let's look over here. Then I have on the lower left, I have the D7. This is a Saptamsha. This represents children. So again, look at in the first house, you have Venus, Sun, because they're in the first degree with the Lugna, repeated. You have Saturn in the seventh house. It's not with K2 here. So in this Amsha, it's not together with Saturn, but it picks up again in another one. So um, and again, the Amsha is like you basically are slicing and dicing the natal chart to get these amshas. And so again, when you have planets that are right up half of each other, it's hard to split them. It's like hard to cut a piece of cake that small to move them apart from each other. But occasionally they happen. But again, you can see like this energy is traveling through all these amshas. It's like pretty intense. So yeah, so again, Sun, Venus in the top here. So again, authority, king, with no mercy, no love. Saturn on it. And again, and then you have a parivartana exchange of houses between Mars. So that brings more of that military energy here with the moon, the public. Um, yeah, so here in this D7, you have one moon, sun, Venus in the first house. You can think of Mars there too with the parivartana and Saturn aspect. 5 planets aspecting the Lugna. So this is another big one. This is D7 represents children. So the legacy of this whole event is like, you know, just unprecedented as well. Yeah, so that's the children. Now I also saw on the D12, it's like, and the D12 is a Wadashamsha represents parents. So, because again, the people on the playing field, on the military field, are essentially the parents. So their children will be affected, but also like their parents, like the people who are like, you know, left at home because they're too old, essentially, and too old was like, I don't know what at that time, 40, 45, 50, um, maybe, or older, the grandparents essentially, they're they're at the mercy of this whole crazy game that's going on here, situation that's going on here. So if we look at the Dwada Shamsha, so parents or grandparents, again, we have the Sun, Venus in the Lugna with Rahu, Mars. So again, twisted, unusual, ambitious, military energy. And then you have Saturn and Ketu back together in the seventh house. I mean, it doesn't get any more intense than this, I don't think. I mean, all the way through the chart. So in this one, you have Rahu, Venus, Sun, Mars in the Lugna with Saturn. So again, you have 5 planets on the Lugna. This is another important. So what I was seeing from this is that this is an event that will go down in history and affect generations, both up and down. And especially if we're talking about karma here as a Vedic astrologer, this is going to affect, because all these strange situations, people are going to, it's, it's going to be hard choosing the right thing to do no matter what, because it's going to seem like no matter what you do, it's, you perish or you lie or you steal or you cheat or whatever, like that's the only way to survive. And so, this is going to be like generational karma, that's going to be affected here, up and down. Like even all the children that got, recruited to the, what do they call it? The youth program or the Nazi youth program and stuff like that. I mean, they're innocent children, but they still participated and it still affected their mind and who knows what they did. And, again, I don't know what the uh, karmic ramifications of that are, but, again, no easy choices in this kind of situation, but you can see it's like, traumatic up and down, um, historically, generationally is what I'm seeing here. All right. So yeah, so a lot of the, again, I'm choosing these, charts, the celebrity charts and moments in time and stuff like that because they represent, they mimic in some ways the current sky pattern. But yeah, so you can see there's some intense energy in August. Not quite the same way. Hopefully this is the beginning of World War II, but still, just so you can kind of see how because I can talk about this in a theoretical way, but to actually talk about a chart that embodies the energy, it just kind of brings more life to it, I think. So it brings more life to the concept. So anyway, Mercury, Buddha, transits in August. So Mercury, the planet of rationality, intellect, it's detail-oriented thoughts, rational thoughts. August 1st, I mentioned Saturn, there's an exact aspect on Mercury. I mentioned that a little bit. So there's going to be a restructuring of thoughts and mental constructs there. August 3rd, Mercury enters Purva Phalguni. I mentioned again, Purva Phalguni is the hammock, symbolized by a hammock, so rest and relaxation. So we're going to be moving. Mercury starts off in Magha, the throne, the nakshatra represented by a throne, authority. So the thoughts are moving from ambition and authority to rest and relaxation. So hopefully some of you are getting a vacation, is what I'm hoping, so you can, just rejuvenate yourself, or at least your mind. So even if you're still working, but your boss is and they're not, contacting you all the time with deadlines and stuff, that might be a vacation for your mind. Mm, let's see, August 9th, Jupiter exact aspect on Mercury. So, Jupiter is philosophy, Mercury's rational thoughts. They're both about communication and education. So there's going to be and Jupiter is a beneficial, benevolent planet, and it's in Bharani right now, a nakshatra that's represented by the womb. So it's kind of the whole cycle of life energy. So, there's going to be an upliftment or even an up-leveling of thoughts, articulating philosophy and even education. So some of you might be, looking at learning something new, especially philosophy or communications. 18th of August, Mercury enters Uttara Phalguni. So we're going to take some of this playtime Purva Phalguni energy and shift into how can I use all this to serve others and improve, the world, life, humanity. Um, so again, there's this eagerness to help others and relieve suffering. So there's going to be that shift, kind of mid-month, and then August 23rd, Mercury goes retrograde. And again, if you're sensitive to mercurial energy, you're feeling this already. Because usually there's a shadow period. Mercury retrograde typically lasts about 3 weeks, and I find about 3 weeks before I start to feel the energy, and about 3 weeks after, I'm still seeing the energy. And so, at least in my world, when Mercury goes retrograde, I start to see more kind of detailed mistakes and stuff that need to be fixed. Like I need to really, go through things with a fine-tooth comb to look at important details and make sure those are all lined up. And mistakes, typos, issues with communication can happen. Typically, in my life, people from the past show up. So people I haven't talked to in a while, or heard from in a while, just kind of pop up out of the blue, or I'll get an email or something like that. It's kind of funny. So sometimes that's how I like know Mercury retrograde is coming because I'm like, oh, I haven't heard. I heard from two or three random people from the past, like in the last few days. I'm like, oh, Mercury retrograde, yeah, that's coming up. Okay. But when it goes retrograde, there's this energy of reviewing, reassessing communication, travel, business, because these are all things represented by Mercury. And it's conjoined with the sun, aspected by Saturn this whole time. So Mercury's gonna, the mind is gonna reassess while this whole purpose reconstructing or restructuring purpose and career is going on. So there's gonna be a lot of reworking internally. Um, so again, considering because of the sun, considering like mission, work, purpose, and also health, sun represents that. So even if there is like this sudden shift, but I don't, it might be sudden, but I don't think it's going to be short term because Saturn, is a slow moving planet. So I think whatever shift happens is going to persist for quite a while. So if there is any fallout from this restructuring, um, I think the idea here is like don't waste that pain, like use that pain or discomfort, if even if it's not pain, discomfort, and use it for good for yourself and others. And then 20th of August, Mercury's retrograding, so it's going back into Purva Phalguni. That might be a little bit more rest and relaxation once there's a clarity that happens with the new purpose that's being developed here, a new direction. Um, and then Mercury goes combust. So again, even more so, um, that's when this restructuring of, um, like there won't be an out picturing, an outer external manifestation so much of the things Mercury represents, like a travel, communication, computers, things like that. But there's going to be this review of thoughts, mental habits, and also internal dialogue. Like, do our thoughts support this new decision that's been made to move in a new direction? So all that's up for kind of grabs and reassessment. Then we have, and most of these transits I've already talked about. We have Mars or Mongol, Jupiter or Guru, Saturn or Shani, Rahu, which is Rahu transit. So August 1st, I mentioned Jupiter exact aspect to Mars, see previous slide. Saturn exact aspect to Mercury, see previous slide. On the 12th of August, Mars enters Uttara Phalguni, which I mentioned this nakshatra a couple times already. So again, Uttara Phalguni is also symbolized by a hammock, such as similar to Purva Phalguni, with the addition that there's this interest in helping others. So, and Mars is a planet of initiation and drive. So, um, this might be a new initiative to spend free time or free resources doing charitable work or public work to help others. And then on the 18th of August, Mars enters Virgo or Kanya. Mars is not super happy in Virgo because it's ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is an enemy to Mars. But Virgo is an earthy dual sign, so Mars is going to try to gain some traction here. Um, Again, Mars is fiery and erratic, and Virgo is like planned and organized. So that's part of why Mars doesn't do super well here. But Virgo has this connotation of like health and hygiene, and if you bring together health and hygiene with new initiatives, you might actually end up creating new initiatives for self or others related to like health regimes or trying out new health regimes, that sort of thing. Um, Developing new health regimes for self or others. The other thing is that Mars doesn't do particularly well in Virgo because if we were looking at a Virgo lugna, so Virgo rising chart, Mars is what we call a temporal malefic. So Mars is a planet that represents enemies, and Mars is the lord of both the third house of communication and siblings, as well as the eighth house of death, chronic illness, and stuff like that. So the themes of the third house and eighth house are going to be brought into this Virgo constellation, wherever it happens to sit in your chart. So new communication, new drives into esoterica, um, uh, possible start or inflammation related to chronic illness, things like that, are possible. Um, the other thing is that once Mars moves into Virgo, it's no longer going to support Rahu's 1 5 9 aspect. So the energy that's being aspected from Rahu into Leo, the fifth house, is going to end. So it's going to bring a little less confusion to things going on in Leo, because Leo is really important this month, as you can see. And then on the 27th of August, as I mentioned, Saturn is there's going to be an exact aspect to on the Sun. So, again, it kind of corresponds, like Rahu's going to bring less of its convoluted, hidden, confusing energy. And then, about a week or 10 days later, there's going to be this like reconstruction of career health purpose. Yeah. So those are the outer planets. So I've got a celebrity chart here, and so it looks like we're like heavily Europe influenced right now with this month's talk. So this celebrity chart is Coco Chanel, the fashion designer, who's still very well known today. So her birth data, or at least the birth data that's, let me preface this whole thing before I dive too. So the birth data that's available for her is 19th August, 1883 at 4 p.m. in the afternoon in Sommer, France. Now, after going through her chart, I'm not convinced this information is correct, even though the information out there says that this is like there's a birth chart in hand. If there was a birth chart in hand, I'm not sure it was the correct birth chart. So whether that was by a typo or whether that was by design, and it might be designed based on knowing her personality and history and how she kind of operated in the world. But there might have also been typos. So, like when her birth chart was formed, like there was actually a typo in her last name. So on her birth chart, there's I think it was Chancel or Chaznel. There's an S in her name, so it's not her first name. Her birth name is Gabrielle, and the last name is correct, Chanel. But there's also an S in there, like Chaznel or Chancel or something like that. So there was a typo in her name. But also like for her life, through her life, she made up stories about when she was born. She used to tell people she was actually 10 years younger than she was. She used to make up stories about her family and her beginnings because they were pretty humble. Her mother died when she was 11, and her father dropped her and her sister. I think there were 6 kids in the family, and her father dropped her and her sisters off in an orphanage where she spent her teenage years, and I guess she never saw him again or something. But she told people she was rich and they lived in a well-to-do place, and there's a lot of mystery, inconsistency here, and a lot of storytelling. Um, so yeah, and so some of the things in this chart, when I was looking at it, they made sense for her life and her life history, but some of them didn't make sense at all. So I'll go through it and then talk about it, because there's still a learning opportunity here. There's still stuff to do. So we'll go through it as if it was the correct chart. But then again, I don't tend to rectify charts because I don't feel I know enough about somebody to do that. Even if I take all these different life data points and try to weave them into a chart, I don't know. I've seen other people do it, and it seems kind of forced in some ways. Um, And so I still, when I work with rectified charts, I still feel like I'm not getting the right information. Again, it's a feeling, it's like an intuitive thing. Some of it's like objective as well. Like some of it, like I'll go through this chart and show you like areas that I'm like doesn't make sense to me with the general history of her life. But and some things were absent that I was sort of expecting based on her history. So it didn't all make sense. But sometimes it's just a feeling. And, since I have a scientific background, whenever I see a chart, I never assume it's the right one. Like I always, like there's that skeptical part of me, like, is this the right chart? Is this the right chart? Even if people say, oh yeah, birth chart in hand, I'm like, I don't know, is it the right chart? Um, so there's a healthy skepticism because I do want to make sure I'm working with the right data and the right chart. Otherwise, I can just, it seems like, story makes sense and you just don't question it, but then, it doesn't really make sense on a deeper level. So anyway, so let's see what we can learn from this. And again, part of the reason why I pulled this chart out, even if it's not correct, is that it very much mimics the current sky pattern. Like, look, you have Rahu and Ketu on in Aries and Libra, even though they're swap places, they're still on the, Libra Aries axis. You don't have Saturn in Shatabisha, but you have the moon in Shatabisha in this chart. You have Venus in um you have Venus in Aslesha, so that's coming up. You have Venus combust here, or very close to combustion, so that's happening soon. You have Sun in Magha, in its own sign, that's happening soon. And you have Mercury there. So there's a lot of similarities here. Um, so I thought that's why this would be interesting, but again, I'm not sure it's correct. So hold on, we'll see. We'll go through it. At least it'll be interesting. All right, so let's go through. So again, we always start at the lugna, the top of the chart. It's a Sagittarius or Danu lugna. The nakshatra, rising nakshatra is Mula. Mula is symbolized by a bunch of roots tied together. It's Mula is ruled by Ketu, so there's this again hidden, unexpected, even destructive energy surrounding that nakshatra. Um, if you have benevolent planets here, they tend to work better because this is pretty intense energy. But the deity related to this nakshatra is Kali, the dark goddess of destruction. So that's how we're starting this chart off. And Sagittarius is a dual fire sign, so a lot of action, a lot of passion, but also a dual nature. Yeah. Um, and this Lugna is aspected by Mars, so another a fire planet. And it Mars is in Mrigashirsha nakshatra, which is symbolized by the head of a deer, and it's Mars is about seeking, searching, um, that sort of thing. And so Mars is a planet that represents things like courage and leadership and being a pioneer, like forging your own path. So that makes sense. This one clearly had a lot of drive, a lot of passion. Um, there are clearly destructive elements of her personality behavior. So, maybe. The thing is also, if you look at the ascendant here, it's at 7 degrees, 26 minutes. So we're only about half an hour into this nakshatra, into this constellation Rashi, because each Rashi only lasts about 2 hours, depending on where you are in the world and what time of year, but on average about 2 hours. So, we're only about half an hour away from being Scorpio Lugna, which would make a lot of sense for this woman because had a lot of drive and ambition and was a transformative figure in history. Um, so, I just noticed that, but I kept going, I'm like, okay, we'll work with this, see if we can. Um, the other thing is that we have um, Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is in the ninth house of death, destruction, chronic illness, esoterica. It happens to be exalted. So Jupiter should be strong. Um, but it's also Sunday, it's in the first degree. So there's some weakness, but mostly strong here. And then it's with Venus. So, and the eighth house represents deep psychology. So on a deep psychological level, this person should be fairly benevolent. The other thing is that I put the Dasha order here. This, Coco, if this is correct for Coco Chanel, then she was born in Rahu, but within like a couple of years or something, she was in Jupiter. So she ran her Lagnatia, the planetary period of her ruling planet. And so those years, her primary conscious years as a child and adolescent should have been very Jupiterian. Jupiter is it's like I've mentioned Jupiter, like I have a whole talk on the symbolism. Jupiter's like Santa Claus. I mean, it's like benevolence and high-mindedness and charity and education. Um, and that wasn't her experience as a kid. I mean, her mother died at age 11 and she was in an orphanage. Her father dropped them off and didn't come back for whatever reason. Um, but, maybe because again, that's eighth house stuff, sort of, death and, maybe it affected her in a negative way and her philosophies about life in a negative way. Like, maybe you could spin it that way. Um, but I'm just like, then I started remembering actually Jimi Hendrix's chart. Jimi Hendrix actually was a Mula Sagittarius rising, and he had Jupiter with the moon in the eighth house. So not only was Jupiter exalted in the eighth house, but moon was Swa in its own sign in the eighth. I mean, he had a massive eighth house. Both, and especially because it's deep psychology, Jupiter represents intuition. Um, if this is correct for Coconut, she was very intuitive. But the thing is, in the deep psychology, she should have been very high-minded. And based on her actions that have come out, um, I'm not sure that's who she was deep within. Um, so again, if I'm trying, and I felt like I was trying really hard, to make this chart work for her. Maybe because she was in this eighth house energy, which is not easy energy during her child. Maybe it affected her philosophy of life and psychology and made it more negative. There is this Saturn aspecting onto this house. Saturn is in Rohini. So again, Saturn on its own represents things like discipline, perseverance, poverty, obstacles, delays. So there's that. But Saturn is in Rohini, and I mentioned Rohini in another chart is like the most attractive. So if there was structure, which probably came from the convent an orphanage she was a part of once her father dropped her off, that was actually good structure for her. Like it gave her um, beauty and for her psychology, like it actually gave her some stability, is what I'm seeing here. So I don't know what her story is at the convent, but it probably should have been a good thing. The other thing is that, Venus represents the arts and Jupiter represents her, and Jupiter is in Punarvasu nakshatra, which is again a quiver of arrows. So like this um, starting off place, kind of a home base, going out, coming back, going out, coming back. With Venus here, I could see this being her art of sewing, actually, especially with Venus being an Aslesha. Aslesha as if we're looking at Venus as an art and Aslesha as a nakshatra, I think I mentioned in other talks that I often find like models and actors, actresses have placements in Aslesha because again, there's this hypnotizing energy. And if we have Venus here, there was this hypnotizing energy around art, and also probably sexuality, especially because we're in the eighth house here. But even though we have Saturn, which kind of, potentially brings this energy of poverty, but also beauty, like structural beauty, that's essentially what her sort of sewing and fashion design was, is like very utilitarian. instead of all these like kind of really ostentatious, kind of frou-frou, frilly, laced up dresses with like, infinite amount of detail and stuff that you get lost in like a fluffy cloud. She was stripping it down. She was a minimalist. She's like, is this functional? Like, she's like, forget the corset. I can't even breathe. It's like, let me put pants on so I can ride my horse, freely instead of doing side saddle. Like, um, so again, there's a possibility here, but then when I see Saturn and Rohini with this Jupiter Venus, deep down, she should have been a fairly high-minded person. Because again, Punarvasu is a fairly high-minded nakshatra. You do have the Venus there, so there might have been that kind of seductive quality, which she had. She had all these like, really wealthy, famous lovers and stuff like that, and also hidden, escapades, sexual escapades, and stuff like that. But Jupiter should have tempered that quite a bit. And I'm not sure that was true. I think a lot of her relationships ended up being political and financial in nature. There was, I think, true love in her life, but like her partner, who was it? I think maybe it was Boy Capel. I don't know if that was what she would consider the love of her life, maybe. But he passed away suddenly, and so Venus in Aslesha can be sudden, unexpected, you know, um, death and stuff like that, um, of a loved one. So, but when I looked at the time when he passed away, she wasn't running Venus, I don't think. So, I was like, maybe, but it seems like on a deep psychological level, she should have had structure with beauty, with luxury. Um, and I don't think she was because, again, there were a lot of reports that she was, homophobic and anti-Semitic, and she was actually a collaborator with the Nazis when they invaded Paris. And she kind of spun that story. Like, I think she had 4,000 employees, I think all women or something. And Germany invaded Paris, and she just fired everybody. And it was actually her way of clearing the deck because they had protested and gone on strike to protest. I don't know if it was wages or conditions or both, but she's like, let me just clear the slate. And then the thing is, like, she ended up moving into the Ritz hotel at that time, sometime during there, and that was the headquarters of the Nazi front in Paris. Somehow she managed to do that without getting scalded by the public because other women even blinked an eye at the German officers were just castigated mercilessly because they were essentially supporting or being friendly with the enemy. And she lived in the hotel of the German, headquarters. So I don't know. I was just, and again, she has other stories like when she went and developed her perfume, Chanel Number 5. Her financial partners were Jewish. And so they saw what was coming. So they actually sold their shares to a Christian Frenchman. And then after the war was over, he handed their shares back to them. But what she tried to do during that time was she tried to say, I'm of Aryan descent and they're Jewish, and so I should be full owner and get full rights on the royalties or whatever, or the profits from Chanel Number 5. Like that's pretty deep, serious maneuvering that doesn't line up with this, high-minded Jupiterian artist. So, again, I'm just like, I don't know if this is the right chart. Anyway, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's get back and go through this more systematically rather than me just kind of riff on the chart. But so also if we're going back to Jupiter here as her ruling planet, it's gone to the eighth house, which is a house, it's a moksha sthana, which is a house where the main motivation of the person is freedom. And I think that was partly true for her, but I think she's more interested in money and power. Again, these are just, I'm not an expert on her life, but just things I was reading about. I was like, I don't know. Um, and again, she seemed to always come up with fabricated stories, and even her her work was about fabricating stories and identities and stuff like that. Like she even like developed costumes for the Russian ballet and all sorts of things like that. So there's like different layers of how this energy played itself out. And I got the sense because I was confused about this whole chart and whether it was right or not. I figured, well, Mercury's going retrograde, so maybe Mercury is an important planet for her real chart, whatever her real chart is, and or Rahu, Ketu, because those are planets that, again, it's like hidden, unexpected, unusual, secretive, energies. So I'm like, whatever her real chart is, probably Mercury, Rahu's, Ketu are important. So anyway, getting back to this, so eighth house here, so freedom house, but also other people's monies, esoterica, death, deep psychology, luxury, attention. So I mentioned these other things of how the sewing could have come from her Jupiterian period. That's possible. If this is true, deeply intuitive, but also alternative minded person. So probably both, I would say for her. I think those are true. And the seventh house, so again, Venus, excuse me, Venus here is the 11th lord of income and easy money. And if it's combust, like again, it doesn't really make sense that if it's combust, that because she earned so much money in her life, for her 11th house to be combust like that kind of doesn't make sense. And then the other thing is that, like, Jupiter, which is also like banking and finance and stuff like that, it aspects into her second house of savings, and Jupiter's debilitated there. So even though Jupiter and Venus aspect the second house, they're not super strong there. Um, and Mars aspects the second house, so there's going to be some instability there. And she like racked it up. She racked up the dough. So I wasn't seeing huge money in her chart. And I wasn't seeing, again, like a strength in her, if Jupiter's exalted in the eighth house, that might represent strength of mind, but I'm not seeing strength in the body, and she lived a long time. So anyway, let's get back to the notes here. So I try to stay on track a little bit. So Saturn's in Rohini, I mentioned that, aspecting Jupiter and Venus. So again, beautiful structured art, clothes, again, because and Saturn also aspects the moon. It aspects 10 houses away. So Saturn, moon, and Venus both represent clothing and art, and the arts. And so Saturn, this beautiful structure energy of Saturn is on both of those. And that's essentially what her work was. She wasn't known for color. Like she kind of stripped it of color. She turned everything black, kind of like this dark goddess Kali energy. And she created the little black dress, right? That was one of her um, claims to fame. Um, there's also a Kala Sarpa yoga here. Almost all the planets are on one side of the Rahu Ketu axis, so that indicates ambition and drive. And it's on the axis of the 511 houses. So the fifth house is creativity, the 11th house is income. So that makes sense. I mean, she had a lot of drive there, and Rahu specifically has a lot of drive, is in the 11th house. So other, income, money, that makes sense. The second house, again, aspected by debilitated Jupiter, Venus, and exalted Mars. So she's going to be practical, innovative. Her voice and her savings, things that support her, and it's going to be attractive, luxurious, face, speech, clothing, because those are things that can be represented by the second house. The third house is a full moon in Shatabisha, and she has a Saturn aspecting here. So this can, I think, indicate mental health issues like depression, anxiety, um, which I think were probably true for her, I'm guessing. Aspected by Mercury and Purva Phalguni, Sun and Magha, with Saturn and Rohini. So her way of speaking is going to be speechless, authoritative, witty, and dry, which she's known for these Chanelisms, where I don't think she was like a huge, chatty Cathy type, Gabby type, but um, she would kind of, spit out these one-liners that would just people would remember. And so she's known for all these like sayings. So that's all there. All right. So we'll talk about speech. So the fifth house is intellect and creativity. It's got K2 here in Bharani. So it's like Bharani is again, excuse me, it's symbolized by a womb. So there's a lot of energy here about life and death and bringing things forth and letting them pass. And so that was, she was definitely like a, ended a whole age or phase of a certain kind of fashion and created her own. So, that works. It's unusual, innovative, separate. And I think she was just doing her own thing, unexpected and explosive. I think it blew up pretty quickly, in her life. So, that part works. I think, the ninth house, so we had Sun, Karko, Bhavanasha. Again, I have a whole video on this. So essentially, the sun and representing father in the house representing father, it can bring troubles to father, which, again, if he dropped his girls off in an orphanage, there was probably some issue there. Um, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like mean spirited or anything, but maybe he didn't have the money. He thought they'd be better off, you never know. So you don't know what people's real motivations were, but again, the sun is in Magha here. There should have been some strength because again, sun is in Leo. And I don't know, I mean, her father was a traveling salesman, essentially selling, I think, clothing. Was here, there, and everywhere. And again, that doesn't really fit with this energy of like sun and Leo. Like sun and Leo is going to be somebody who's going to be in charge somewhere, Um, so that didn't really fit, I don't think. Although, again, there was probably some issues with father, but we never know what those issues were. Sometimes issues with the relationship, sometimes it's with the person themselves, and it could even be like medical or something like that. So, yeah, I don't know if the ninth house father thing fits, but if we look at the ninth house as like authority or government, yeah, that fits more so, because again, you have sun and Magha, almost like or sun and the sun house, almost like that beginning of World War II energy. And if the government was the Nazis, then there's going to be some authority here. But you don't have Mars on the ninth house. You don't have Rahu Ketu on the ninth house. So I would expect if we were talking about the Nazi regime, that there would be more than just Sun and Leo. So again, I'm not sure that ninth house really works for that either. Um, and Mercury is the 10th lord, so there might be something there though, because if the 10th house is career, and the lord of the career is in this ninth house of authority or government. She was actually a Nazi collaborator. Um, so, there's some possibility here, but again, uh, this seems fairly benign. It doesn't seem like covert or hidden or twisted or anything like that, which I would expect. So, I don't know, maybe not. Um, and also an important moment, actually, so to tie this chart with the chart of World War II beginning. She closed her couture house down at the start of World War II. And at that time, she was running K2 Rahu Jupiter. Um, so there was, again, K2 Rahu was a lot of hidden, unexpected, energy. So that makes sense. But if you go back and like look at the chart side by side, basically Rahu and Ketu were back on the the Aries Libra axis. Sun is in its own sign, is in Leo with a combust, or with, and the chart not, because in the other one, Venus was in Leo as well, but um, Venus is combust in both charts. So again, no mercy. But that also means she would have no mercy potentially, or she wouldn't be expressing like fine arts, and extraordinary luxurious clothing and stuff. So again, it works, but it doesn't work. And then Mars aspecting Capricorn, Jupiter aspecting. Oh, okay. So Mars is, again, I'm just in my notes, I'm just comparing the similarities between the two charts. So in the other chart, the World War II begins chart, Mars aspected Capricorn or was connected with Capricorn. Jupiter also aspected all the water signs in both charts. And the thing is, you have almost a Saturn return. Um, so, it's yeah, there's a lot of similarity between this chart and the World War II chart. So, I don't know. And again, I kind of went through and I could see how there was some potential truth in the different houses of this chart, but again, some of it didn't add up. So usually when I get confused like that, or I start questioning whether this is the right chart, I start looking at the Chandra Lagna, which is the moon rising chart, or the Surya Lagna, the sun rising chart. And when I did that, I kind of ended up in the same place where um, some of it made sense and some of it didn't, and it still didn't feel like a complete story. So if you in your mind rotate this chart, so the house that the moon is in the chart, is on the top of the chart. So moon in Shatabisha, she would be in Aquarius rising, and you have this like Saturn on the moon, which would bring Saturn into its own house. So from a mental perspective, this is a engineer, NASA scientist, ice queen. If we were looking at her mind, um, and then the sun in its own sign, that would be her seventh house of independent business. So she was fired up about independent business, but was essentially an engineer and ice queen. Yeah, maybe that's possible. I think for her. But she would be a person essentially who was like engineering ideas and was about imagination, but also like had again this mental health problem of probably anxiety and or depression that was fairly obvious and visible even because again it would be her lugna. If we switch it to the Surya Lugna, so the sun rising chart, sun in its own sign in Magha, I mean, we're talking like leadership, royalty, born to be a royal person. So she had a icy mind, a mind of ice and a soul of fire. And I don't know, maybe she was a very contrasting person like that. I think she did have a lot of fire and drive. But again, it didn't quite make sense, all of it. So yeah. Um, so again, I was still trying to figure out like why I was confused by this chart. Um, and I looked at, sometimes there's more Rahu and Ketu energy if you look at the stars, like the nakshatras and stuff, the nakshatra rulerships. So in this chart, actually, the Lagna, Sun, Moon, and Rahu are all in Rahu Ketu. So there is potentially more Rahu Ketu energy in, again, Lagna, Sun, and Moon. That's like body, mind, soul. That's a lot more Rahu Ketu energy that you would initially see in this chart. So maybe still, I still wasn't convinced though. And then I looked at like she was born into Rahu and then very quickly moved into Jupiter Dasha or planetary period, and she was in Jupiter until age 17. Then she went into Saturn. So again, just Jupiter is like optimistic, and Saturn is like uh, obstacles, delays, almost like a falling from grace. So actually, I would think it would have like if she was dropped, if her mother died and her father dropped her off in an orphanage, and she was living in a convent, a strict convent, very disciplined and austere. Like that was more of a Saturnian period, and then and then once she was an adult and free to do whatever, then she started making, building an empire. So I don't know, like again, that energy shift doesn't really seem to work. The other thing is that Jupiter aspects into the fourth house. So that would have made her mother very strong and very benefic, and maybe she was, but also probably fairly well off. And their home, at least, even if the mother wasn't well off, the home should have been well off. But, mother died at age 7. She was a washerwoman, and they lived in some little shanty. So again, it doesn't really add up. And also, she would have, especially growing up in Jupiterian energy until she was 17, she would have been like a very much more, I think, intuitive, spiritual type person. But she was very pragmatic, and the way that she was wheeling and dealing, with her business and even her liaisons and things like that, you know, having all these really wealthy men basically finance her endeavors, and even I forget his name, the one man she met, when she was singing in a cabaret or something, and then she just sort of glommed onto him. Like she just showed up at his house and kind of moved in and became his mistress for a few years. And she made some hats, and then eventually decided to move to Paris and really build on that. But you know, essentially she was a mistress for quite a while. And that doesn't seem quite Jupiterian. But maybe, you never know, I guess. Somebody having what I see here as this very strongly Jupiterian Venus energy in the eighth house, it again doesn't really fit. She was very pragmatic and like, and she was a survivor, she's very nimble, agile, street smart, and this person here is much more of this chart here is much more, I think, high-minded than where she was at, or at least the choices she was making on the day to day. Let's see, the second lord. That's the second lord. So the second, and also like the money. I wasn't really seeing money in this chart. So the second house is Capricorn. It's ruled by Saturn. Saturn's gone to a sixth house of like debt and enemies. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, maybe at certain times, but that's just not looking good as like a general outlook of this, the wealth for this chart. Also the 11th house, Venus I mentioned is combust. That's the 11th house of income. That's not looking great. The other thing I found out, she was a heroin addict essentially. Like she was injecting heroin for like most of her life daily. And I was like, what? Because it kind of blew my mind because I was like, heroin addict, what? Like, and I was looking for it in the chart, and I'm like, where would that be? Because, like, maybe you could stretch it and be like, maybe Venus and Aslesha, because Venus represents things like exotic flowers and stuff, and Aslesha is like can be medicine and drugs, but you have this strong Jupiter here. So I don't know. I'm not seeing it. Like, I would have thought maybe something in the sixth house, like a Rahu K2, because Rahu and K2 is like drugs and addictions, in the sixth house of daily habits, maybe. I mean, you have Saturn there, but you have Saturn in Rohini. So I'm like, I don't know. I'm not really seeing a heroin addict here. And she was a Nazi sympathizer. So I think if that was true, like I mentioned, the ninth house would have been like the World War II house. Like that was just like, Saturn with K2 and Mars. Like, yeah, that was clearly like Nazi blitzkrieg energy. But this is like um a fairly benign government system that her business was involved in. So, again, so what did I do with all this? So again, I didn't feel like I got better information or better click when I looked at the moon rising chart, the Chandra Lagna, or the sun rising chart, the Surya Lagna. So what did I do? I did this. So I just drew up a Samaya chart. So this is an update chart. So I just like essentially asked the question, like, what is the real chart for Coco Chanel? And I cast the chart, pushed the button on my software, and this is what popped up. And this actually feels right and makes more sense to me than the last thing that I went through. So that's another way to kind of work through like whether something is true or not. So the information here is 28th of July, 2023, 17:03 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this is a Scorpio Vrishika Lagna. So maybe she was actually a Scorpio Lagna instead of a Sagittarius Lagna, which probably made more sense for her, frankly, because she is pretty scorpionic more than a Sag. The other the other thing is that you shift uh, her real chart, quote unquote real chart, to Scorpio. Um, I think that brings Mars, her ruling planet, into the eighth house, and that makes a lot. Mars in her eighth house makes a lot more sense for who I think Coco Chanel truly was, versus like exalted Jupiter, Venus in the eighth house. That makes more sense. So I think her real Lugna was Scorpio. And this Lugna is ruled by Mars, which is in Purva Phalguni. So the arts, so that makes sense. And, Scorpio Lugnas are transformative, they're rebellious, they're unrelenting. Click, click, click. Um, Mars went to the 10th house of career and fame, yes. Conjoined with Mercury and Venus and Magha. So, yeah, Queen. Queen of Couture, yeah, and it was Artistana. So this is a house of making wealth and making money. Yes. So again, this seemed more in line with her energy. And this 10th house is aspected by Saturn and Shatavisha, so the structure. It's also aspected by Rahu and Ashwini, Jupiter and Bharani. So again, we have growth, we have ambition. Yes, yes, yes. You have all these planets. So 1, 2, 3 planets in the 10th house. You have 3 more planets aspecting the 10th house. That's a lot of energy going into the 10th house of career and fame. And yeah. The other thing is that Mars, the ruling planet, the Lugnatia aspects back into the Lugna. That's going to bring strength to the first house of physicality and personality and psychology. So yes, yes, yes. The moon here is bright, but it's debilitated. It's in Jesta. Jesta is not particularly it's not a particularly kind. It's a little bit of a harsh nakshatra. Sometimes you see things like law enforcement and stuff like that. So it can be this controlling, a bit of a controlling energy, which she was. So there was an edge to her. And you have Moon here, so imagination and face. That's what she was known for, which is true. So check, check. Saturn also aspects the Lugna, so the super strong Saturn, so it's like retrograde and swa in its own nakshatra of Aquarius. So again, you are getting this like Saturn on the moon again. So that's recreated from this last chart. So again, the last chart, I think, however it was derived, did tap into some level of the stream of consciousness, which is Coco Chanel, but I'm not sure it's again, correct. But here you have, so again, Saturn retrograde, super strong Saturn. This actually creates a Shasha yoga, which is a Raj yoga. It's a royal yoga, very strong Saturn on her Lugna. So, and it's also going to be on her moon. It's not only on her Lugna, but it's on her Lugnatia, her ruling planet. So her chart is going to be dominated by Saturn. And she was like, iron fisted lady. I mean, despite her being dripped in pearls and diamonds and stuff, to do what she did at that time, she had to be. I don't think she was a cream puff. I don't think she's a cream puff at all, especially when you find out her views on, gay and same sex relationships and Jews and being a Nazi sympathizer. Yeah. So, what else here? So yeah, it's a Saturn dominated chart, dominates, 7 planets in the whole chart. And again, you have this like NASA engineer coming from her lineage, her childhood, into her first house of personality. Um, so yeah, there's also a Kala Sarpa like pattern. Um, you do have Moon you don't really worry about because it moves so fast, but Saturn is on one side because it moves so slow. I would still consider this a Kalasarpa because the moon moves so fast you don't really count it, but the Saturn moves so slowly you kind of don't count it either. Some people might call this a Kalasarpa like pattern. but there's still ambition and drive here. Um, Also Saturn, this really super strong Saturn on the moon. Again, we're looking at, and Saturn's in Shatabisha. We're talking about mental health issues, potentially anxiety, depression. Um, the Saturn Mars combination across the 4-10 axis here. Workaholic, athletic. She was both. You actually are just moving out of a planetary war between Mercury and Venus here, and that would represent like a clash of reason and aesthetics. So like looking good and functionality, form and function. Yeah. It'll also be like relationships and business. That was an issue for her, right? Well, mm, you do also have Rahu aspecting into this 10th house. So ambition being first, it's an Ashwini, being a pioneer. Also this idea of illusion. And the thing is, now you have Rahu on the Lagnesha. So now and you have it on the 10th house of career and art. So, and that's essentially what she did was she brought this kind of illusory quality to her clothing and her designs. She was looking more at rather than the showy, hugely detailed like display of wealth type aesthetic to how do I use clothing to bring the woman forward, through her, less is more type of philosophy and letting women be comfortable in their bodies and their skin so they could shine rather than be constricted by all this, frill and lace and stuff. So now we have, again, Jupiter and Venus. Jupiter's aspecting on Venus, so we have that combination. So again, high couture, luxury, we have that. Um, Second house, we now have Jupiter aspecting in its own sign. So yeah, okay, now we're talking money. And with Rahu there, there's ambition, drive. Jupiter's, this is essentially like Jupiter in Sagittarius here. It's almost like her second house of savings is like a bank. So she's got massive amounts of savings, and her fourth house. Now her fourth house is looking more like what you would expect if her mom died early and at a young age and was a washerwoman. Now she's got Saturn. Saturn is a planet that represents things like servants, right? Rather than before you had Jupiter and aspecting into Pisces. So this makes more sense. And Saturn represents poor, poverty, servant, illness, chronic illness, especially because Saturn's in Shatabisha, right? 100 physicians. So there's some serious chronic illness here for mom, and she passed away. The fifth house, you have Mars aspecting into the fifth house of intellect and creativity. So again, you're going to get somebody sharp, pioneering, and creative, innovative. 6, 12 houses, so 6 and 12. So now you have Rahu Ketu. There you go. Now you have Rahu Ketu, which can represent hidden, unexpected, also addictions, drug use, stuff like that. And now you have Rahu in the sixth house of daily habits, and you have Ketu in the 12th house of loss and loss of consciousness as well, like checking out, isolating and stuff like that. And then Jupiter, that's a lot of that. So now you can see heroinetics. Um, the ninth house, you have Sun again, a karako bhava nashaya, but it's in Pushya this time. So there's a difficulty with father or authority, but it's in Pushya. So there's problems with father, but I think father may have been actually more nurturing than the story is generally told as this like just cold-hearted guy who just dropped the kids off at a convent and never showed up again. It might have been that he couldn't for whatever reason. Um, and it might have been that, father had drug use because for him, this K2 and Libra, um, the fifth house, one, two, three, four, oh, excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong house. The fifth house from father is going to be, again, this Scorpio energy with Saturn, Mars, Moon. Um, So, that's a lot of the mind. The mind. There's gonna be there's gonna be mental health issues for dad as well if this chart is correct, or giving us more information, dated information on Coco Chanel. Um, this was a little bit, I don't know. I mean, again, it doesn't really explain so much like a Nazi, conspiracist or something, or a Nazi collaborator, but I think almost everything else seems to work here. Yeah. And I mentioned, like, if you look at the real chart, quote unquote, the one that I went through before and spent to Scorpio, um, Mars goes to the eighth house of hidden things, other people's money, sex, and scandals, which is more her, I think. The other thing is in this chart, we have Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and Rahu all in stars of Rahu Ketu. So there's more illusion here than what, initially meets the eye. And then the main planets in this chart, um, I would say, are Mercury, Mars, and Saturn. So Mercury is going to be cerebral, rational. Mars is going to be innovative, and Saturn is going to be like, perseverance. So again, like a cerebral engineer, which I think is who she was. Um, rebellious or whatever. Because part of the reason why is, again, you have the Saturn, Mars aspecting the Lugna, and they're aspecting each other. So I think Saturn and Mars are going to be pretty important here. They're also involved with Mercury. And she began, well, if this is so much, this chart, the beginning dasha for this chart is Mercury, Mercury, Mars. So again, rational, innovator. So it doesn't feel complete, but this chart feels more honest and straightforward with her energy. So, and it helped me clarify the other chart. Again, especially seeing this, I'm even more feeling like that chart that I went through, that's her official birth data, wasn't actually correct. But yeah. All right. So, a lot of charts today. Boy, I wonder how long this talk is. Probably super long. Anyway, a lot of stuff going on in Leo. If you're looking at your own chart, find out where Leo is, figure out which house Leo is for your chart, and that'll give you some idea where these energies are playing out. So, like here, I've listed the basic meanings for the houses. So the first bhava or house is self, personality, health, reputation, and the opposite house or that axis is the seventh bhava, spouse, partnership, independent business. So if Leo is in one, figure out if Leo is in one or the other, and that'll give you some idea of what aspect of your life is going to potentially shift this month. And the next slide, I have the other house. So again, this is just to give some general indication of where these energies might be popping up for you, because again, Leo is so prominent this month with all the transits. All right. So, wow, that was a really long talk. I think I went through 3 cups of water. Plus, it's really hot, so that doesn't help. But anyway, as always, I thank you for your time and your interest in my work, and as well as Vedic astrology. I hope you found this interesting and helpful as you navigate the energy cycles of your life that are coming up. Again, I have all my teaching videos on Vedic astrology in my concepts playlist. So if you're looking for those, you'll find them there. I also do individual birth chart readings on Zoom. If that's of interest, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com. I have another YouTube channel on natural medicine, so other Vedic arts like Ayurveda and yoga, as well as natural medicines like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. And that channel is called Nature Source Care. So, as always, I humbly offer this work and teaching and interpretation for your betterment. So until the next one, take care. Namaste.